Ever read a book about a lady transmigrating into a novel and catching the attention of the male leads? Well, this is quite the opposite. Irene teleports into a romance fantasy, but instead of the male leads, she somehow steals the heart of the heroine. The story begins with Claudia Chamberlain arriving at the banquet with her brother, Felix. Besides her, Hee-soo, now called Irene, whispers into her ears that she has to choose a groom from the three men. Claudia has no interest and asks why she should. How does Irene explain that these men might kidnap the heroine and take her to an abandoned island? She can't tell the poor girl about her bleak future, so she urges her to pick one of these outstanding men. Irene points to the crown prince of the L'Occitan Empire, telling Claudia that marrying him will make her the mother of the nation. Lucas declares that Claudia belongs to him, causing the girl to move away in fear. Irene is about to die from panic. She points to another man, the villain duke who rules over a city of crime and is almost as powerful as the crown prince. Benjamin urges the princess to choose a husband, but Claudia calls him a criminal. Our poor girl can feel her lifespan shortening. She points to the last man, a holy priest who is also the hero of the empire. Constantine thinks the princess is about to choose him, but Claudia calls him a blasphemous man. She says a priest shouldn't abandon his vows to God just to marry someone. Poor Irene is on the verge of exploding. She yells at the princess to pick one, and Claudia finally reveals her choice. She declares with a strong voice that she will remain with Irene forever. The four men all stare at the culprit while the poor girl feels like dying. A year ago, she had transmigrated into a romance fantasy, becoming Irene Amber. And somehow, she had seduced the female lead. Kim Hee-soo was born with a special ability to seduce anyone, but her charming power only worked on the same sex, causing the women around her to fall in love with her. She also had a favorite book she had loved since high school called The Flowers That Bloom on Day Branch, or FBDB. The novel was a romance fantasy that hooked the reader until they finished the last page. Hee-soo had left a review on the fan page, vowing that her life would be incomplete without the novel. But after transmigrating into a character inside the novel, the girl regrets her words. Even worse, she becomes Irene Amber. Irene, the eldest daughter of the Amber family who were in great debt, was also the female lead's friend who died in an accident. Hee-soo cries when she wakes up in this body and vows to avoid the heroine so she can live. She tried to survive, but the heavy debt of the Amber family almost crushed her spirit. Just as she was about to die, the female lead appeared like a goddess. She saved Irene's life and paid off all her debts. Touched by the power of money? Touched by the female's kindness, Irene vows to follow her and live the rest of her life as her feet wiper. But that decision is going to cost Irene her life. Back at the disastrous banquet, our heroine is shocked when Claudia announces that she will not be getting married. She can almost see her poor life slipping away from her. The culprit, meanwhile, makes fun of Irene's terrified face. She even stretches out her evil claws and plays with the girl's soft cheeks. Irene cries in despair while the princess thinks of giving her some clothes as a gift. She has a seductive smile on her face as she urges Irene to accept her gifts. Our heroine is frightened because she can only live a happy life when the protagonist gets married. Yet, the girl keeps clinging to her. She even wonders if Claudia secretly hates her and is getting her revenge. The two girls play around and have totally forgotten about the jealous, furious men. Lucas has a dark look on his face and refuses to believe that Claudia will live with that thing. The thing hides behind her mistress in fear, while crying like a baby. The prince approaches, vowing to twist Irene's neck if the princess really chooses her. Our poor girl is terrified, but thankfully, her mistress comes to her rescue. Claudia warns the prince not to touch her and promises to challenge him if he tries to hurt Irene. Benjamin is also amused by the princess's strange taste. He never knew she would be interested in a girl who was almost sold off by her father. Irene cowers behind the princess while Claudia warns the villain to stop threatening them. The man is amused, calling this the power of love. As if things aren't terrible enough, Irene feels a strange power behind her and turns around in alarm. The priest is gathering his divine power, preparing to purify this evil thief. The girls are both alarmed, and our heroine almost pulls out all her hair. Thankfully, someone interrupts the chaos before our poor Irene is purified into ashes. Felix pulls the girls close and reminds the men that his sister isn't an object. None of the men own her, so they have to respect her wishes. Claudia is relieved and says that only her brother and Irene truly understand her. She glares at the three men, announcing that she dislikes them. She thinks their love is scary and manipulative and calls the men barbaric. Claudia declares that Irene will own her heart for the rest of her life, causing our poor heroine's soul to almost disappear. The princess drags her away and returns to their mansion. She complains about the possessive men, saying they only treat her like a trophy and never respect her wishes. Claudia is in tears as she vows never to love them and wishes that they could let her go. Irene never knew the princess disliked those suitors. She always thought that since Claudia was the female lead, she would also like one of the male leads. She feels bad because she knows the men are clearly evil, yet she kept asking the princess to pick them and almost ruined her life. Irene apologizes for forcing the princess, but Claudia says she must have her reasons. She even uses this chance to ask for a hug from Irene. Our female lead agrees, and the girl happily hugs her. Claudia declares her feelings for Irene, but immediately panics a second later. She just realized that she is acting like those possessive men. Irene teases her friend, but assures her that she is fine. The female lead suddenly looks serious and even proposes. Well, as a friend. She wants Irene to remain her friend for the rest of her life. The girl agrees with a happy smile, but secretly sheds a few tears. She can tell that she is destined to die. Irene might have a little crush on Felix, the female lead's only brother. Because he was a genius born with a large amount of mana, he became the youngest minister of magic. His personality is also friendly and kind, causing everyone to fall in love with him. He also has a big sister complex like other older brothers of the female protagonist. The man is practically a walking unicorn that shouldn't exist in real life. But right now, Irene is panicking because that rare unicorn is outside her front yard. Felix apologizes for visiting without a notice, but our heroine responds like a robot. Just like they say, every human must have a flaw. Irene has had a strange disease all her life. She might be able to seduce any female she meets, but in front of the men she becomes mute and turns into a stiff robot. Felix glances at her stiff face, wondering if she is angry. Irene panics and says she can't be angry at a beauty. She feels like dying after those words, but the man is amused. He laughs, thanking his parents for giving him such a pretty face. The man's handsome face glows like the sun, and Irene has to admit that the siblings are a stunning pair. She wants to know if Felix is still building his magic resistance. Irene knows that the man was supposed to be a sacrifice in the original novel. The male leads were obsessed with Claudia and tried to use demonic relics to isolate her from the world. Those relics almost destroyed the world until Felix appeared as a sacrifice. He ended up taking the evil energy into his body but was unable to control the power. The man lost his mind and murdered his own family members. The male leads, who were the main culprits, worked together to kill him and save Claudia. Irene wanted to prevent that horrible fate from occurring, so she approached Felix and urged him to increase his magic resistance. Irene thinks about the past and is still amazed that man listened to her request. He is really an angel. Well, this angel has bad news for our heroine. Irene had hired a new servant to work at her estate, but it turns out the man had secretly been bribed. He added a lethal poison into the girl's meal, and Felix tells her that she will soon be dead. Our heroine is stunned, but asks how much time she has left. The genius replies that she only has half a day. He even reveals that there was also an assassin, but he had gotten rid of those men. Irene wonders what happened to them until she remembers that she only has a few hours left. Felix watches her panic with a smile, before he announces that he has a way to cure her. Irene, who has already pulled out half of her hair, is surprised by his words. She moves closer, thanking the man for helping her. The genius stares at the wild space between them and helplessly asks the girl to move even closer. He holds her hand as he talks about his sister. Claudia has always been like an angel, and has been loved by everyone since she was a child. At some point, any man who laid his eyes on her would fall in love with the princess. If she refused their advances, they would resort to force and try to control her. Felix did his best to get rid of those men until Claudia announced that she would take care of them. But soon, the girl became more timid and lost her self-confidence. He always blamed himself for failing her, but everything changed when she met Irene. Because of this girl, his sister regained her happiness. He thanks Irene because Claudia hasn't been this happy since she was a child. Felix is done helping Irene, but points out that she is so defenseless. He calls her cute and finally understands why his sister is always worried about her. Our heroine's mind goes blank, but the man has another request. He politely asks to kidnap her and take her away. Felix successfully kidnaps the girl and brings her home. Claudia is happy to see her friend and immediately hugs her. She never knew the men would actually attack Irene and vows to break every bone in their bodies. Our heroine trembles because her friend is filled with a thick demonic energy. Behind her, Felix urges Claudia to first comfort Irene before thinking about revenge. The princess realizes her mistake and quickly asks about Irene's health. Our heroine already knew she would become the men's enemy, but never thought they would go this far. Claudia urges her not to blame herself, but Irene has no time to waste on those men. She announces that is going to focus on her happiness and offers to have fun with the princess. Claudia is excited and grabs the girl's hands. She drags her out of the room, saying she has something to show her. The three children run around the mansion happily, but Irene's happiness soon turns into great shock. She sees some servants setting up a banquet, and there is even an amusement park inside the room. She almost loses her mind when Claudia announces that the gifts belong to her. Our heroine nearly kowtows to thank her for her heavenly blessings. The siblings see her frightened face and assume that she is unhappy. Claudia, eager to please Irene, announces that she also prepared a separate dressing room. Felix seriously thinks about connecting a river to the fountain and making a boat for Irene. The princess rejects his idea, instead suggesting that they build a train track. They even plan to order a magic carriage just for the girl. Our heroine is shocked by their wastefulness and quickly stops the siblings before they order the whole world. She says she is happy, but Claudia doesn't believe her. She is upset because the girl knows everything about her, but she has no idea what she likes. Irene is filled with a burning passion as she declares that her first love is money. She also likes food and snacks and loves looking at beautiful faces. Claudia watches with sparkling eyes, as the girl says she likes having friends and playing with dolls. Her ultimate dream since she was young is to live a rich and unemployed life. Irene, thinking that the siblings will despise her dreams, collapses in fear. Claudia tells her not to worry, and our heroine wonders if she can become a money-eating parasite. The princess says she is happy to have Irene by her side, so she isn't a parasite. She leans over, offering to become Irene's sponsor since she is already a rich beauty. She even tells the girl to call her by her nickname, Chloe. Our female lead cries in happiness and jumps into her sugar mummy's arms. Beside them, Felix watches and realizes that a cute face is really the best weapon. Irene is having a conversation with her younger brother and tells him she will be living with the Chamberlains forever. The boy knows his sister has always been weird, but now thinks that she is crazy. She points out that their father was a crazy man who sold his whole family for a loan. She plans to cut ties with him and urges her brother to come live with her. Claudia has already agreed to sponsor the siblings. Felix appears just as she is finishing the calls and says he has a question about the magic resistance. The girl looks shocked, causing Felix to tease her. He says her mouth always becomes a triangle when she is nervous. The genius wants to know why she suggested resistance training, and Irene pretty much spills the beans. She claims that she had a prophecy about the future where Felix sacrificed himself for the greater good, and she wanted to change that ending. Felix isn't too upset about his destiny and also points out that magic resistance won't allow him to control demonic powers. He explains that demonic power makes people unable to control their desires. Since demons are born based on desires, the possessed individuals are unable to control their instincts. Irene thinks about her love for money, food, and beauty, and is worried that she might be possessed by a demon. She believes the three male leads are also being controlled by the demons, which explains their weird behaviors. Irene is unwilling to let Felix become like them and vows to prevent his tragedy from occurring. She promises to hold on to him, even if he turns into a demon. Felix is touched by her care but says he doesn't want to hurt the girl. Irene is confused, so he kisses her hand and explains that demonic energy might reveal the desires hidden inside his heart. The innocent girl thinks he is going to hurt her, but she misses the sly smile on his face. The only torture she will face is probably going to happen in bed. Still, Felix is worried that she might be unwilling, so he urges her to leave if he becomes tainted by demons. The girl refuses and even holds his hand tightly. She thinks of a brilliant idea to make sure the three of them can live together forever. Irene tells the man to torture her now so he can relieve his desires before he gets possessed. The girl is really digging her own grave. Felix warns her to stop provoking him before she gets into trouble. He says he can endure the desires, but Irene keeps protesting. The man drags her stubborn head over and forces her into his laps. He strokes her head, urging her to go to sleep. Irene is confused, but is more worried that her poor neck will soon be broken by his hard thighs. She complains, but the man refuses to move and keeps petting her head. The girl wonders if this is his torment, but, somehow, soon falls asleep. The next time she wakes up, she faces a teary Chloe who scolds the two for sneaking around behind her back. The princess also wants Irene to sleep on her lap. Our heroine quickly agrees to her request and even complains about Felix's hard thighs. The man points out that she had still slept very well. Chloe glares at her annoying brother and chases him off to work. Felix replies that he is the vice minister, so he can always be late. His sister accuses him of abusing his powers, but he points out that she has been skipping classes. He even says Irene doesn't like delinquents. He leaves with a happy smile after breaking his sister's heart. Meanwhile, Chloe looks at Irene, promising that she isn't a bad student. She almost cries as she begs the girl not to hate her. Irene says she can never be disappointed in the princess, and the two share a loving look. Just then, they are interrupted by a loud cough as a man appears, looking awkward for disturbing the couple. Chloe calls him father, but doesn't look pleased to see him. She probably thinks that he interrupted her time with Irene. The poor man feels heartbroken because his own son had also scolded him for arriving suddenly. He tries to greet Irene, but has no idea what to call her. Daughter? Daughter-in-law? None of them seem right. Hugo chooses to call her Miss Amber and invites her to his study for a discussion. Irene immediately becomes nervous, assuming that the man is about to scold her for stealing both his daughter and his son's heart. As soon as they are alone, Irene, feeling like a guilty thief, apologizes to Hugo. She is sorry for stealing away his daughter, causing bad rumors to spread about the princess. Hugo tells her not to apologize and even thanks Irene for making his daughter happy. He declares that as long as Chloe is happy, he doesn't care about the rumors. Our heroine confirms that this is another daughter slave. She wonders why he wanted to speak to her, and Hugo reveals that the crown prince is searching for Chloe. Lucas had summoned him to the palace to ask about his daughter. Hugo had tried to refuse, but now he is running out of excuses. He thinks the prince has lost his intelligence because he is running about like a crazy dog. The man asks Irene to watch Chloe because the princess always acts without thinking about the consequences. Our heroine, like an eager son-in-law, vows to protect his daughter. She sees Hugo's stunned face and tries to correct her mistake. The man looks helpless but asks her to watch Chloe when they go out and stop the girl from saying anything reckless. Irene agrees, but in the next second, we see the two girls having lunch at a cafe. Chloe, the rich sugar mummy, asks Irene to order everything she likes. Our heroine behaves like a greedy cat as she orders all her favorite desserts. She is feeling happy until she notices the price. Irene's eyes almost fall out of their sockets. Chloe thinks she doesn't like the cheap prices, but the girl cries out that it is too expensive. The princess isn't bothered by the price and tells her to order everything she wants. She totally looks like a pampering boyfriend. That must be why some people get jealous. Some ladies gossip about the two, unable to believe that Chloe would reject those handsome men because of an ordinary friend. They say Irene has no marriage value because she is drowning in debt. They even accuse her of clinging to the Chamberlains for money. Well, they aren't exactly wrong, but Chloe won't accept such rumors. She calls the manager over, asking him to send away those ladies. She even says she will book the whole place for the day, but the man still refuses. The princess changes her strategy and decides to just buy the whole cafe. Thankfully, Irene drags her best friend away before she goes crazy. She suggests that they go shopping, but Chloe is still worried that she is upset. Our female lead says the princess can buy her everything she likes, and Chloe immediately becomes happy. The two head over to a candy shop first to get some cotton candy. The ladies are enjoying their day when suddenly they hear this annoying, aggravating voice. A drunk fat man comes over and praises Chloe's beauty. He thinks the little girl is scared, but when Irene looks at her best friend, she knows the princess is about to murder someone. The man calls Irene an underdeveloped kid and even pushes her away. A demonic energy spreads from Chloe as she calls the man all sorts of rude names. She also warns him to take his dirty eyes off her. Besides them, Irene is about to faint from panic. The strange man refuses to leave, so Chloe insults him even more. A hooded man passing by hears her voice and immediately turns around. It turns out to be the crown prince. Chloe doesn't notice him because she is still angry at the drunk man for insulting her best friend. She calls him an old bum, which makes the drunkard furious. He reaches out to grab the girl, but just then Lucas pulls out his sword and attacks. The prince is about to jump in like a hero when several men in hoods suddenly appear. They protect Claudia and take away the screaming drunkard. Lucas can't believe the situation is over. He was supposed to be the knight who saved the beauty. Chloe notices the remaining suspicious figure and wonders who that is. That prince is heartbroken because his beloved doesn't even recognize him. The princess finally regains her senses and has no idea what just happened. Behind her, Irene has a cunning smile because this was all her plan. Our heroine thought the only way to chase the male leads away was to show them that Chloe doesn't need a man. She brought those guards over to show the crown prince that he is useless. Irene thought her idea would work, but the crown prince feels no shame, and even comes over. He questions Chloe, asking why she is hiding from him. He was about to send him men to search all the Chamberlain's estates. Chloe says he can't do that, but the man shows off his power and even blames her for ignoring him. The girls stare at him with similar disgusted looks, secretly calling him rude. Chloe reminds the prince that he has a fiancée, but the man suddenly starts screaming. He yells about his love for Chloe and calls his own engagement a joke. Irene stands to the side, feeling disgusted by his words. Lucas suddenly turns to her, accusing her of spoiling his sweet Claudia. The princess puts a hand around her friend, ready to defend her, but our heroine insists on answering the crown prince. She tells him that Chloe has regained her senses, and if the prince only wants her to be obedient, then he never loved her. Lucas yells at Irene, warning her not to teach him about love. Our heroine says he has to do what Irene wants, if he wants to win her heart. Lucas has an arrogant look on his face as he orders Chloe to tell him her desires. The girl is very happy as she reveals her only request. The prince has to stay the hell away from her. Lucas can't scold his beloved, so he glares at Irene with a murderous energy. The little coward hides behind her bestie, begging her to save her life. Chloe says the conversation is over and pulls her friend away. She is still confused by the strange men until Irene reveals that she hired them. The princess is happy and calls Irene her savior. The two leave, but our heroine gives the abandoned prince a gloating look. They return to their mansion and Irene studies the calendar. It will soon be the national day, and every noble who has received territories from the king will have to visit his palace. The Chamberlain are very wealthy, so they will surely attend the ball. Unfortunately, our heroine's family is drowning in debt, so she can't participate. She is annoyed because she has to stop the prince from courting Chloe during the ball. Just then, a servant announces that she has a call from her brother, Liam. Irene speaks to her brother and suddenly looks shocked. Apparently, the Amber family have also received an invitation to the founder's ball. Liam also thought it might be a prank until he saw the emperor's seal. Irene isn't relieved because she knows this is a trap set by the crown prince. Lucas must be planning to deal with her during the ball. Irene isn't going to sit around waiting for her death, so that night she tries to sneak out. Unfortunately, she is caught by the handsome Felix. Irene is stunned by his handsome face, which seems to be glowing at night. The girl even releases a strange moan but soon covers her mouth in shock. She quickly changes the topic and asks Felix for a teleportation artifact. The naughty man says she might fall off a cliff if she uses the artifact, or a part of her body might go missing. She might even end up stuck on a wall. Irene is successfully frightened and begs the prince to stop. She chooses to use a carriage, but Felix offers to escort her. Irene panics and claims her friend doesn't like visitors. The genius turns into a demon king as he asks if the friend is male. A frightened Irene says it is a female, and he immediately turns back into Mr. Sunshine. He volunteers to escort Irene, but the girl keeps refusing. She acts cute, giving him a pinky promise and vowing to return safely. Felix feels helpless, but still gives her a little jewel that can save her life. Irene thanks him with a happy smile and soon leaves the mansion. In L'Occitan, there are two secret organizations that control the underworld. Carlisle, the city of chaos ruled by Benjamin, and a private investigative company called Selenium. Irene is heading over to the investigative company. Unlike the popular Carlisle, no one knows the true location of Selenium. But that isn't a problem for our heroine who has read the whole novel. Before meeting Claudia, she had to gather random information just to survive. She even sold the future information that happened in the book. Irene arrives at Selenium and sees a gorgeous lady waiting for her. She rushes over with a big smile while calling the woman's name. Martina is the best spy in Selenium, and Irene had used her secret charm to steal the lady's heart. The spy opens her arms and Irene jumps in to give her a big hug. Sigh, I also want a hug too. She admires the lady's lipstick while Martina has fun playing with her chubby cheeks. Irene complains that everyone is trying to kill her, but Martina reminds her that she stole the heart of the most popular girl in L'Occitan. She has heard about Irene's fight with the crown prince and is ready to say her final goodbyes to the girl. Martina can't help Irene this time, but still reveals that Duke Lemberg came to Selenium. Our heroine recalls some parts of the original novel. Martina was actually one of the many villains in the story. She had fallen in love with the Duke and had helped him by giving him all the information he needed. That is why Irene had approached Martina before the Duke could appear. She knew the spy had a horrible childhood, full of loneliness and poverty. The lady always pretended to be cheerful but was actually very lonely. Irene had gotten close to her by listening and being empathetic. Because of her seductive charm, every lady would become obsessed with her, and Martina was no exception. The spy reveals to Irene that the Duke had asked about her information. He wanted to know everything about her, including her likes and interests. Martina is sure that the Duke must have a very annoying plan. She asks about Irene's visit, and our heroine reveals that she was invited to the Imperial Ball. The spy teases her, saying the girl might die in the palace and it will become her new grave. Irene knows the spy is right, so she needs more information. She promises to tell Martina more secrets about the other nobles. A few days later, the two besties go dress shopping for the banquet. Irene pokes her head out of the dressing room, asking when Chloe is going to choose her dress. The princess happily says they all fit Irene, so she can't pick one. Our heroine wonders why Chloe is so focused on her dress when she only used a minute to select her own outfit. After trying on dress 515, Irene collapses on the couch. Looking at the mountain of clothes, she wonders just what will make her beautiful. She tries to boost her confidence, telling herself she looks like a model in any outfit. The designer glances at the crazy girl who looks like a flattened pancake. Our female lead glares at her, urging her to give her some praise. Instead, the woman her head away in disdain. The pancake is crying in despair when Felix arrives. The man calls her cute, which makes Irene very nervous. She tries to chase him away and asks him to help Chloe pick an outfit. The siblings finally settle for a pink dress, and they both praise Irene's good looks. They glance at the designer, urging her to give some praise, but the woman remains silent. Felix offers to give her a bonus, and the designer imagines the gold coins. She immediately praises Irene to the skies, which makes the siblings happy. Once again, we see the power of money. On the day of the Imperial Ball, the Chamberlain siblings arrive in a luxurious white carriage. They are both dressed in white and golden outfits, looking absolutely stunning. The two offer their hands to their favorite obsession, coaxing her to step out of the carriage. Their behavior makes Irene nervous, and she complains that she isn't the main character. The two promise to stick by her side, so she agrees to step outside. Our heroine has finally arrived at the Imperial Palace. The three of them walk in together, and the whole room shifts. People start murmuring almost immediately. Irene feels it instantly, and her grip on her own clothes tightens. She's trembling. But Felix steps in before it gets worse, telling her not to listen. Then Claudia follows up with something even better. She tells Irene that those people live for other people's pain. They want to see her crack, and if she gives them that satisfaction, she'd be just as bad and ugly as they are. Now, Irene, sweet as always, comes back with, "Don't say that. Claudia will never be ugly." And Claudia just drags her own cheeks and goes, "Well, I know that." Something about the moment hits Irene differently, though. She gets this strange sense of déjà vu, and she can't shake it. Back at the hotel, Irene collapses onto the bed, and her mind starts running. She's thinking about Lucas and how they came from the same place but ended up in two completely different worlds. She looks down at the relic in her hand, the one made by Felix and Chloe, and it hits her just how useful it's been. According to what she was told, it's supposed to reveal a location. She figures Lucas and whoever he's with are probably already together by now. Just as exhaustion starts pulling her under, there's a knock at the door. She heads out to check and finds a glowing man sitting casually by the window. He greets her like they're old friends, all confidence. Claudia immediately assumes he's in the wrong room, but the man stops them and introduces himself as Arasa Moore. He wastes absolutely zero time. He gets down on one knee, tells Irene her yellow eyes look like gemstones, and confesses he'll regret it forever if he doesn't shoot his shot right now. Irene's internal reaction, but then something clicks. A flash of recognition crosses her face. Before she can process it fully, though, she cuts him off and tells him plainly she only believes in God and intends to follow the country's religion strictly. The man came prepared for rejection, But probably not that one. Arasa is still stuck on our girl and he is not taking no for an answer. She shuts him down clean, tells him she has no money and walks off, thinking she's dealt with another desperate beggar. But this man actually sprints around to block her path again. She repeats herself firmly, no money, leave. But Arasa breaks down and insists it's not about money at all. He genuinely likes her. Claudia steps in with a polite but firm rejection, and that should have been the end of it. Instead, Arasa grabs Irene's hands and starts squeezing tighter, telling her she'll change her mind once she gets to know him. Irene is screaming for him to let go, telling him it hurts. And Arasa is still out here begging. Our girl has had enough. She kicks him, right where it counts. Arasa folds immediately, howling in pain, and she takes off running without a second thought. Her internal monologue is half guilt and half satisfaction. She tells herself it was just self-defense. Perfectly reasonable. But as she's making her escape, she runs straight into Felix and hits the ground. She looks up and it's him standing there, calm as ever. He tells her he came because he was worried, but she clearly handled things herself. He pulls her up and immediately notices her wrists are red from where Arasa was gripping her. He starts casting a spell on them gently. Irene tries to explain she's not usually violent, but Felix cuts her off before she can finish. He says coldly that those hands deserve worse than what she gave them, that the punishment was actually too merciful. Irene asks what he would have done, and without blinking, he says he would have skinned him alive, all while wearing the softest expression on his face. Felix then takes her hand and invites her to join Chloe for tea. Irene immediately perks up, asking if there are pomelo tarts. There are. They walk off together while Arasa watches from the shadows, still nursing his wounds. After that day with Arasa, something strange starts happening. Men just keep showing up, one after another. Irene isn't stupid. She knows Lucas is behind it. This man somehow assembled what can only be described as a rotation of suitors and sent them at her one by one. The audacity. One particular guy shows up fuming and immediately starts questioning Irene's confidence. Asks her why she's being so stubborn. Implies she has nothing to offer. Irene doesn't even flinch. She tells him calmly that she doesn't need anything to show off, just to say she's not interested. The man pushes harder and tells her she should know her place, considering she's living under the Chamberlain family's roof. And this is where Irene delivers the most satisfying response. She agrees with him. Says she didn't see herself clearly before, but the Chamberlain siblings fixed that for her. They told her she's pretty, cute, and adorable. And because of them, a man like him couldn't even catch her attention. The guy is absolutely losing it. Just then, Claudia arrives holding an umbrella and completely ignores the man's existence. The guy lights up, trying to introduce himself as some count's second son, but Claudia walks straight past him and hands our girl a bouquet of fresh freesias. Just like that, the man becomes invisible. Irene is glowing over the flowers, asking how Claudia even got spring blooms out of season. Turns out she raided the Imperial Palace greenhouse, and His Majesty personally said she could. Claudia then notices Irene's flushed face and pivots to mothering her immediately. She wipes her sweat, fanning concern, and then turns to the man still standing there and asks if he'll take responsibility if Irene gets sunstruck because of him. The man is stunned into silence. Claudia doesn't wait for an answer. She takes Irene's hand, and they walk off together, leaving him standing there alone, looking absolutely ridiculous. As they walk away from that whole mess, Irene pulls out a napkin Claudia embroidered and tries to guess what the design is. Claudia is watching her with full internal pressure. Irene guesses wrong the first time. Wrong the second time too, but she starts piecing it together. Red thread, circular shape, several sticks are around it, and the fact that Claudia just randomly showed up with flowers earlier. Irene looks up and says it's a flower. Claudia breaks into a smile immediately. Irene then wraps her arm around her and says nobody in the world cares for her the way Claudia does. It's genuinely one of the sweetest moments, and then our girl immediately follows it up by suggesting they go play in the water. Very on brand. They end up sitting beside a bathtub outside, and Claudia looks at it with the most betrayed expression. She was expecting a lake. Irene explains patiently that they're in a different place now. People are watching. A bathtub is enough for now. Then the conversation drifts, and Claudia tells Irene that she's not the only one who finds her cute. Apparently, the men Lucas has been sending are not random at all. His Majesty is involved too. Irene is not even shocked anymore. She just says they still can't compare to Claudia. Nobody can. Then she asks Claudia to fill up the tub using her magic because she's never actually seen her use it up close. Claudia tries to play it cool, but she absolutely cannot resist when Irene asks like that. So she calls on her spirit affinity and fills the tub effortlessly. Claudia's affinity with spirits is extraordinary, high enough that she can communicate with them freely. The only thing she cannot do is form a contract with one. And that restriction exists entirely because of one specific person who took that from her. Irene is bouncing with excitement, watching Claudia fill the tub like it's the most incredible thing she's ever seen. Claudia downplays it immediately. Says it's just a basic request level ability and that anything higher requires a signed contract with a spirit. Irene gets curious and starts asking questions. How does the contract work? Why hasn't Claudia done it? And Claudia gets quiet. She admits she's tried multiple times to send her flame into the spirit realm, but something keeps blocking her every single time. She followed every step correctly, but something was always there, interfering. Irene goes still the moment she hears that. She already knows what it is. The spirit of vain nihilism, a dangerous entity that feeds on the emotions of its contractor. It's been sitting in Claudia's life, deliberately blocking her from forming any contract because it's been waiting, feeding, growing stronger off her. Honestly, the fact that this thing was allowed to exist in the original story makes me question the writer's humanity. Irene pulls herself together and carefully tells Claudia that the spirits around her obviously adore her, but the one blocking the flame to the spirit realm might actually be trying to protect her from something dangerous. Claudia latches onto that immediately and asks if that means a mad spirit is attached to her. Irene hesitates, then admits it's highly probable. She's been anxious about it. Worried that something bad is coming for Claudia specifically, her voice gets smaller as she says it. What if Claudia gets hurt? Claudia, who has spent years believing she was a disappointment, who watched everyone leave after expecting her to be the greatest spirit user in the Empire, who barely graduated and carried that shame quietly. She never even knew the real reason behind her failures. And now she's sitting beside a bathtub asking what she's supposed to do next with wide, uncertain eyes. Our girl has a plan, and she's been waiting for the right moment to lay it out. She tells Claudia that the spirit blocking her flame has to be at least an intermediate level or higher, since only lesser spirits exist freely in the natural world. That means Claudia needs to contract with something equally powerful to counter it. Claudia immediately panics and asks how that's even possible if entering the spirit realm means getting attacked. Irene just folds her arms and smiles, drops the information casually that higher spirits actually exist in the human world too. Independent ones. Outsiders from the spirit realm with no allegiances. Claudia looks at her like she just spoke another language. Irene explains that these spirits can sign contracts without needing anyone to enter the spirit realm at all. Claudia asks how she even knows any of this, and Irene simply says, I know everything. She tells Claudia that after the founding ceremony, the three of them will go find one together. Internally, Irene is already promising herself she'll keep Claudia smiling every single day until then. Later, a note arrives, and it drags Irene right back into the 100-day arrangement she thought she had escaped. She is exhausted just reading it. But she looks at the Chamberlain siblings and quietly decides she will endure every second of it for them. At the founding ceremony, the leader delivers a 2-hour speech that has Irene suffering in silence. Then a dragon appears and completely saves the atmosphere. Irene's eyes go wide with genuine wonder. Just as she's recovering, Claudia announces flatly that she finds international ceremonies completely useless. Felix responds quietly that nothing in the world is truly useless, and that avoiding hardship eventually ruins even the things you love. He then turns to check on Claudia and finds her fast asleep. He lifts her without a single complaint and carries her toward the palace. Irene watches them leave and turns to scan the crowd with work on her mind. She spots Erica Dappelasian almost immediately and starts moving toward her. Then she sees the man standing beside Erica, and her entire mood crashes. Before she can redirect, he calls out her name. Irene keeps walking like she heard absolutely nothing. Our girl tries her best to walk past him like he doesn't exist, but her father closes the distance and asks her to come speak with him. She tells him flatly she doesn't know him and has no reason to go anywhere with him. He pushes closer and asks her to put her anger aside just for a moment. Irene doesn't even blink. She asks why she would be angry at a stranger. Her father finally drops it and says to stop playing games and come find a quiet spot to talk to her own father. And that word, father. Irene lets it land and then fires back. She tells him he already sold her off, so why does he care so much about something that now belongs to someone else? The crowd around them starts murmuring. Her father laughs it off and insists he is still her biological and legal father and that nothing changes that. Irene is already calculating in her head. She brings up legal obligations and asks out loud who exactly failed to fulfill their responsibilities as a parent. He raises his voice and tells her she needs to repay everything he gave her growing up. The crowd eats it up. They look like a wonderful family having a minor disagreement. Irene eventually lowers her head and agrees to find somewhere quiet to talk. Her father immediately starts congratulating himself for raising such an obedient daughter. She's already thinking 3 steps ahead. Later, Claudia finds out everything and absolutely loses it. She's shouting, demanding answers. When Felix mentions the name Earl Teeb, Claudia doesn't even let him finish. She calls the man old and a thief without pausing for breath. Irene laughs and tells them not to worry because she has no intention of actually marrying anyone. She plans to use the situation to her advantage. Claudia squints and asks what kind of advantage. Then her expression shifts completely as it clicks. She realizes this is the Crown Prince's scheme. She starts calling him a dog crown prince with full commitment. Felix tells her to stop using bad words. Claudia turns on him immediately and asks whose side he's on. Felix pauses, then quietly repeats the same insult with a straight face and a small smile. The siblings are truly a matching set. Claudia's insults reach a whole new level. She calls him trash. Not just regular trash, but the kind that can't be recycled, can't even be burned, and would have to destroy itself just to be useful as coal to someone else. It is genuinely creative. When she finally calms down, she looks at Felix and asks how he's staying so composed through all of this. Felix explains calmly that Earl Teeb is from the kingdom of Krutia on the other side of the globe. Travel is by sea only, and out on the open water in a diplomatic privilege zone. No one would know if something unfortunate happened during the voyage. He lets that hang in the air and then smiles. Irene internally confirms that every word of it is true. Claudia immediately suggests adopting Irene into the Chamberlain family. Felix says it's not possible. She asks how they can just let Irene become a pawn in the Crown Prince's game. Felix suggests simply buying Count Amber out by doubling whatever price was paid. Before either of them can go further, our girl raises her hand and tells them both to stop. No illegal activity. She has a better way. That night, Irene meets with Depletion, and the conversation is anything but small talk. Depletion already knows who she is, calls her the adored one. Says she heard about the flowers from the royal greenhouse. They trade words about roses and willpower and beauty, and it sounds polite, but every line carries weight. Depletion brings up the marriage and says bluntly that the Chamberlain family won't be able to protect her forever. Irene pushes back. Says living without personal willpower sounds like a sad existence. Depletion smiles and asks if that same philosophy is what she used to win Claudia's affection. Irene doesn't answer that. Instead, she says clearly that she refuses to be moved by her father's ambition. She will follow her own path. Depletion calls that choice useless and predicts misery. Irene looks at her steadily and says it's only miserable when you don't know who you are. Then she makes her move. Help me, and I'll show you what flowers are truly capable of. Erica Dapalasian looks like the perfect noble lady on the surface, but her history is anything but clean. In the original story, she was Claudia's worst nightmare. Staged accidents. Bought off maids, pushed her into a river, spread poison through elite circles with a smile on her face, and Lucas knew every single thing she was doing and let it happen because it made Claudia depend on him more. Erica only got eliminated when she went too far and actually tried to kill Claudia. But here's the thing that makes her more complicated than a simple villain. Erica doesn't actually care about power. Her family does. She grew up as a pretty doll dressed in her family's ambitions with no will of her own. Right now, with Claudia locked away in the mansion and away from Lucas, there is no clear reason for Erica to cause trouble. So when Irene approaches her and offers to reveal the true meaning of flowers in exchange for her help, something stirs in Erica. Just enough curiosity to keep her listening. Meanwhile, across the palace, the nobles are gathered and Duke Depletion opens his mouth at the worst possible time for Lucas. He suggests smoothly that sending a count's daughter to Krutia as an engagement gift is beneath the empire's dignity. That Count Adam deserves someone of higher standing and exceptional beauty. The other nobles immediately agree. Lucas sits there watching his own scheme unravel in real time and starts mentally tracing who pulled the Duke into this. He turns to Benjamin, hoping for backup. Benjamin smiles and says pleasantly that, since everyone disagrees, perhaps Count Adam should simply choose whoever he wants. Lucas agrees through gritted teeth. Then, the moment the meeting ends, he grabs Benjamin by the collar. Benjamin doesn't even flinch. He tells Lucas calmly that he warned him to think before he acts. Lucas snaps back that this is all the Duke's fault. Benjamin simply asks what evidence he has for that, then adds that his hobby has always been watching people ruin their own hard work. Benjamin accepts the compliment about his talent with zero shame and pivots immediately. He tells Lucas plainly that he also tried to get close to the Chamberlain family and questions why they would take in someone like Irene. But then he says something that actually carries weight. He points out that Claudia would sacrifice everything for the people she loves in that household. That kind of loyalty is rare. He then suggests that if Irene's engagement is such a problem, they should simply find a country that has legalized same-sex marriage and redirect things entirely. Lucas tells him the joke went too far. Benjamin asks if it looks like he's joking. Lucas turns away and mutters that the family's honor would be destroyed. Benjamin steps closer with that signature smile and says that for their daughter's happiness, they would take it. Lucas is visibly rattled. The conversation shifts, and Benjamin starts picking apart exactly how Irene has quietly changed everything around her. Claudia is different because of her. Erica's father stepped up at the noble meeting because of her. Lucas assumes it's all about securing the crown princess position for Erica. Benjamin lets him think that for a moment, then starts painting a different picture entirely. He calls Irene a diamond in the rough, says her honesty in every single move is her real power. The right emotional motivation can make people work harder than any scheme. Lucas accuses him of going soft. Benjamin just smiles and says he found a rough diamond and wants to get to it before anyone else does. The way he said that was equal parts fascinating and deeply unsettling. Lucas calls his hobbies weird. Benjamin asks for respect. Lucas reminds him who he's talking to. Benjamin doesn't blink. He simply says he has an interesting plan and asks if Lucas wants to hear it. Their common goal right now is not Claudia. It's Irene. And Benjamin says all it takes is one small touch to completely unravel a person from the inside. Walking down the corridor together, Irene apologizes to Claudia for meeting with Depletion without telling anyone first. Claudia says she didn't even know they knew each other and asks her to give a heads up next time because she was genuinely worried. Irene reassures her, and Claudia responds by saying Depletion and Irene seem even closer than she and Irene are. Irene shuts that down immediately. She tells Claudia she is her person. Full stop. Felix slides in from the side and asks what about him. Irene includes him without hesitation. Then Claudia demands a kiss because Irene's lips look too cute at that moment. Irene barely has time to react before their father appears and calls her baby. That single word unleashes something in the siblings. Both Felix and Claudia immediately start squishing Irene's cheeks from both sides, debating who gets to use the nickname. Their father tries to intervene and completely fails. He eventually just turns around and walks ahead, telling them the celebration is starting and they need to hurry. Later, Erica appears and smoothly suggests that Irene stay with her for the night to talk more about flowers. Claudia shuts it down before Irene can even open her mouth. Erica smiles behind her fan and asks Irene directly if flowers still have value even without beauty. Irene says yes. Erica's smile grows. Then she asks if she can call her Irene. Claudia immediately takes offense. That name is intimate, and Erica is using it like they're old friends. Irene is standing there internally spiraling, trying to figure out why the villainess is targeting her instead of Claudia. While she's turned away, thinking it through, Erica calmly asks Claudia if she can visit the Chamberlain mansion sometime to see Irene. Claudia looks frustrated and tells her not to bother coming. Erica ignores her completely and directs the question at Irene instead. So Claudia wraps both arms around Irene and, with complete authority, says it doesn't matter, because she is the owner of the house. Erica doesn't even flinch at Claudia's possessiveness. She simply says that if she can't come to the Chamberlain mansion, then she'll just invite Irene to her own house instead. Claudia tells her that's not happening either. Erica smiles and points out that there are still plenty of ways for Irene to go places, even if Claudia doesn't let her. Claudia responds with a sharp, "What?" Meanwhile, Irene is literally being squeezed to death in Claudia's arms the entire time this negotiation is happening. Her internal monologue is just one word. Stop. Please. Some days later, our girl is riding a merry-go-round alone, and finally having a quiet moment to think. She reflects on how the Chamberlain siblings have been feeding her, clothing her, letting her sleep and play without a single complaint. She concludes she is essentially the mansion's pet, and somehow that feels completely accurate. Just then, Felix arrives, still in his coat and clearly in a rush. He tells her Benjamin Lemberg wants to meet her. Irene goes still. Felix says he already refused on her behalf, but felt she deserved to know. He adds that Benjamin rules the city of chaos, and he cannot imagine what business he could have with her unless it involves some kind of debt. Irene tells him she was watched closely at the celebration and suspects Benjamin has a plan. She decides she will meet him once. Felix is surprised, but immediately stretches both hands toward her and says he is coming with her. Irene agrees. Then, just as she's climbing down, Felix hits her with something unexpected. He asks with a quiet smile why Claudia gets hugs all the time, but not him. Irene freezes. Her brain short-circuits. She is still processing it when she stumbles on her way down, and Felix catches her, instantly pulling her close. He looks down at her and says simply, "I caught you." Felix still hasn't put Irene down, and he is in no rush to do so. He tells her casually that even if someone offers her food, she shouldn't just follow them anywhere. Irene asks why he's giving her that strange look. He says she already knows why. She asks him to clarify. He says nothing and then asks for a kiss instead. Irene goes completely red. She tells him to stop teasing her and put her down. Felix says he doesn't want to. These two are going to give me a heart attack before this story is over. Later, the mood shifts completely. Standing outside a door, Felix tells Irene that Benjamin Lemberg was almost certainly behind both the assassination attempt and the poisoning. Irene says she already figured as much. Felix explains that Benjamin is a man of sharp instincts. He would have sensed immediately that Chloe's words were sincere and moved quickly to neutralize the threat before it could grow. Trampling something before it gets too strong is simply how he operates. Irene summarizes it plainly. She is about to walk into a room with the man who tried to have her killed. Felix confirms it with a quiet, something like that. She grabs the door handle and walks in anyway. Benjamin is sitting there with a cigarette between his fingers, looking completely unbothered. The smoke hits Irene's nose immediately, and Felix responds without a word. He quietly uses his magic to clean the air around her. Irene notices the shift and realizes what he did. Benjamin watches this and then says, "There is nowhere to put the cigarette out anyway." Felix extinguishes it with another spell without being asked. Benjamin then suggests they sit and talk and tells Irene he simply called her to get along. Irene stares at him and asks if he actually understands what that phrase means. Then she tells him plainly that if he is sincere, he should stop with the strange sense. Benjamin says other ladies enjoy it. Irene looks at him and says he seems handsome, but his breath stinks. The room goes completely silent. Felix turns away, hiding his laughter. Benjamin eventually recovers and tells her there is no need to be so guarded. He has no intention of harming her. Then he asks what it would take to catch her attention. Irene's answer is simple. Be honest. Benjamin just smiles and says, "Sit down." Irene wastes zero time. She tells Benjamin she doesn't want him within 10 meters of her and thanks him for sitting at a distance. Then she cuts straight to the point. She tells him to give up on Claudia, confess his feelings properly, get rejected cleanly, then maybe she will consider seeing him again. Benjamin smiles and says he doesn't need her advice. Irene tells him to memorize it anyway because it will serve him better than whatever plan he currently has. She didn't come here because she wanted to. She came to give him a genuine chance at not ending things badly with Claudia. Benjamin leans back and says her version of the worst ending, and his is clearly very different from hers. Losing Claudia's heart would hurt, but that's not his worst fear. Losing her completely and permanently is. Irene asks bluntly if that means he just wants her physically and expects the heart to follow eventually. Benjamin doesn't even flinch. He says yes. Felix stands up immediately. His voice goes quiet and steady in that way that is somehow more frightening than shouting. He tells Benjamin that if he ever forces Claudia into anything, he will not stand aside, regardless of who Benjamin is. Then he tells Irene they are leaving. Benjamin lets them get almost to the door before he speaks again. He says he wishes he had recognized Irene's value sooner. In the past, she had no strong presence, so he never noticed the opportunity she represented. He calls her a gemstone that can reflect tens of thousands of lights depending on how it is cut. Says it would have been fascinating to find her earlier, but he won't gamble on something impossible. He called her here out of pure curiosity, a warning and a final consolation all at once. Then he says something that stops our girl completely. He asks why she looked at him with such sad eyes in the past, even while he was smoking. And then he says it quietly. She changed a few years ago. Like, she became an entirely different person. Benjamin suggests that maybe Irene's preferences simply changed over time. Irene tells him he is mistaken. He says his eyes are good at reading people, and what he sees inside her is nothing but hatred and killing intent. He says he wants to destroy it. Irene goes completely still. Before she can respond, Felix moves. He throws a burst of magical power at Benjamin, who dodges just in time. The strike hits the chair instead and splits it clean. Felix looks at the destroyed furniture and says calmly that the sofa looked pretty old anyway. Then he turns and calls for Irene, and they walk out together. As they leave, Benjamin calls after them and says what he sees in Irene's eyes is the look of a hypocrite hiding deep ambition. A monster. Just like him. He adds that humans should live doing exactly what they want, and that he intends to spend his whole life that way. He points out that Irene claims to love money, yet stays loyal to a family that could collapse at any moment. He leans close and asks what she thinks of him. Irene looks him dead in the eye and says money may have been the first reason, but she will stand beside the Chamberlain family until the very end, even if everything falls apart. Benjamin smiles and says he will use his own hands to help peel back whatever noble cover she is hiding behind. Irene stands up and tells him to try. She is ready to accept everything. Walking back together, Irene asks Felix quietly if he is angry with her. Felix pats her head and says she did perfectly. He tells her to keep handling Benjamin exactly that way. Irene wonders if she should have been more cooperative. Felix shuts that down immediately. He says listening to a man like Benjamin doesn't make you flexible. It makes you a monster. Later, Claudia and Felix show up with their arms full of bags, and Claudia screams Irene's name across the room. Before Irene can even ask what's happening, Claudia dumps every single bag directly onto her, then throws her arms wide and shouts, "Happy birthday." A mountain of cake appears. Irene is completely overwhelmed. She smiles and says thank you, and Claudia immediately declares she is the most adorable person alive. Then pulls out a pair of high heels she bought specifically because they would fit Irene perfectly. Claudia keeps pulling gifts out one after another with the energy of someone who has been planning this for months. A bonnet-style hat. An evening set of handbags. Then she announces she already hired the designer on the spot the moment she saw the collection because she decided they would become Irene's personal designer going forward. She asks if Irene is satisfied with the most hopeful expression on her face. Irene is holding the clothes and thinking to herself that Claudia is somehow more excited about this than the actual birthday girl. Then our girl flips over the price tag on one of the dresses. 143 million. She nearly loses her composure entirely. Claudia then casually mentions she also wants to launch a personal fashion brand for Irene and has already chosen the name, Renee, named after herself, without a single drop of shame. Irene tells her gently that the birthday gifts are already more than enough. Claudia really said happy birthday and meant it with her entire bank account. Irene then pulls out a map and shifts the energy in the room completely. She points to an island called Kamoli in the south of the empire. An island that sits in a diplomatic privilege zone the emperor cannot touch. An island where the Finello Trade Union has banned all outsiders. No one goes in or out. No trade. No people. A completely dry and desolate land where supposedly everything has died. Except, according to a quiet rumor, the soil has recently become rich again. Trees are growing. Plants are thriving in a place where nothing should survive. Felix admits he knows of it and says the island carries a dark atmosphere connected to a pathway the devils opened thousands of years ago. Claudia confirms she has heard of the diplomatic restrictions around it. Irene looks at them both and connects everything cleanly. A forbidden island, mysteriously reviving land, no human activity. That is exactly where an independent spirit would be. She is 100% certain of it. Irene points out that whatever spirit is on that island is no ordinary one, given what's happening to the land. The real problem is getting there. It's completely off limits. She barely finishes the sentence before Felix and Claudia both speak at the same time. Why don't they just buy the whole island? Irene stares at them. Claudia immediately gets excited and says it's a shame Irene's birthday gifts are already sorted because Kamoli Island would have been the perfect present. She starts talking about summer vacations and boat trips like they are planning a leisure holiday and not a covert spiritual mission. Irene tries to steer things back and points out that if they go as tourists, the actual spirit business might get complicated. Claudia says they can do both at the same time. Irene stands there processing the fact that these two just casually suggested purchasing an entire island. The Chamberlain family really operates on a completely different level of reality. Irene then raises the practical concern of travel. Kamoli is far, and using magic to get there secretly might be a problem. Felix confirms it immediately. Every spell used by a wizard is recorded by the Magic Ministry. Irene asks if that's to prevent dark magic, and Felix explains the full system. The Ministry implants a discovery spell and an air blast directly into a wizard's hands. Every movement, every coordinate, all recorded and reported in detail. Irene asks what the air blast does. Felix says it detonates when necessary, like dynamite, built into a person's hand. Irene looks genuinely horrified. Then Felix adds that no wizard can use magic without their hands at all. Claudia has gone completely pale, and her hands start trembling just hearing it. Felix tells her not to worry. He can manipulate the temperature output of his magic to stay below the recording threshold. Simple in theory, Irene then points out that this trick only works because Felix alone can do it. They both stare at her. Then Irene asks if there is a way to retrieve the implanted objects. Felix puts his hand on his chin and thinks for a long moment, then says there is. Irene and Claudia are relaxing in the pool when Irene casually brings up the topic of talking to men. Claudia's response is immediate and completely honest. She says she only knows how to argue with them. Irene stares at her. Then Claudia notices that Irene seems perfectly comfortable talking to Felix, and her eyes go wide. She shoots up and demands to know if Irene likes someone. Irene shuts it down fast and says she just knows someone who seems decent. Claudia is not satisfied with that answer at all. She stands up dramatically, asking who could have made our girl feel this way. Just as she reaches peak interrogation mode, Felix walks in and calls out for Chloe. Claudia turns on him immediately for interrupting such an important moment. Felix simply says their mother is calling. Claudia deflates instantly. She points at Irene and makes her promise to continue this conversation later, then sprints off. Felix settles in, and Irene tells him about the Finello trade. Apparently, buying the island went smoother than expected because money was their motivation from the start. The fake cover was set up, and workers were already hired to avoid drawing royal attention. Irene admits that if she had known it would be this straightforward, she would have moved sooner. Felix tells her the Getchu plan was never only about Kamoli Island. Irene barely has time to ask what he means before Felix reaches out and takes her hands gently, then asks who the person is. Irene goes red immediately. She looks everywhere except at him, and quietly says it is the second prince. Felix releases her hands. His expression shifts just slightly. He brings his face closer to hers and asks slowly if she is hoping to build a close relationship with the second prince. The air between them changes completely. Felix clarifies slowly, asking what exactly Irene means by wanting to get close to the second prince. Irene explains she simply wants him to join their side. Felix processes that. Then he pats her head and tells her he won't stop her, but warns her not to take unnecessary risks. It's dangerous. Irene says she understands. Felix smiles and asks if she can spare him some time after she's done washing up. She agrees. But as he walks away, Irene sits there thinking about everything that just happened in the last 5 minutes. Later, Irene and Felix are with his father, and Irene is already whispering questions into Felix's ear, trying to figure out what kind of meeting this is. Felix whispers back that she probably has a plan and nudges her to share information rather than keep it to herself. Irene agrees. Felix's father is holding a book and gets straight to the point. He says something needs to be kept from Claudia because she might get hurt finding out. Irene pushes back immediately and says keeping it secret would hurt her more in the long run. The father drops his book and says Claudia is too innocent and unpredictable when she is wounded. Better to wait. Felix steps in and says he will explain everything now and asks the father not to get angry. He looks at Irene and she nods. After hearing it all, the father sits in stunned silence. He says he cannot believe they are seriously considering this path. Irene asks if he believes her. He says he has no choice, because the Crown Prince's behavior has been undeniably strange lately. Lucas cannot reach Claudia anymore, and the desperation has made him go completely quiet. Irene finds that shift more alarming than his chaos. These people work together in ways that are almost impossible to predict. Felix says flatly that a man being rejected by one girl and subsequently plunging the world toward chaos and nightmares is genuinely the most terrifying thing he has ever witnessed. Then Claudia speaks up and brings everything into sharp focus. The demon's relic, round in shape, the most powerful and dangerous object in existence, currently sitting inside the temple. And the Crown Prince's power is connected directly to it. Claudia confirms what it is, and Felix finishes the sentence. The Laris, the demon of battle and victory. Felix smiles and says it will be fine. His father immediately understands what that means and stands up slowly. He asks Felix directly if he understands that this means he would be sacrificing himself. Felix brushes it off and says it is manageable compared to the alternative. His father slams his hand on the table. He tells Felix that absorbing the power of a demon is not something you simply manage. Even if Felix survives the process, he would be judged by God, accused of treason, demon worship. And the consequences would not stop at Felix. The entire Chamberlain family would fall with him. He refuses. He will find another way. Felix holds firm and says they cannot let anyone know that someone on their side received a prophecy. His father asks what other option exists then. Felix says quietly that nobody knows he has already been building a resistance to that kind of power, so he will be the one to do it. The room goes silent. Later, our girl knocks on Claudia's door and finds her sitting with Olivia, the sick mother who barely appeared in the original novel. In person, she is warm and bright and genuinely happy just to finally meet Irene. Irene is caught off guard by how different she is from what was written. Meanwhile, Claudia pulls Irene aside and asks about Felix. Irene looks at Claudia's face and can already tell she is not doing well. She tells her that Felix essentially just got beaten up by their father. Olivia's warmth vanishes instantly. She clenches her fist and calls her husband a bastard under her breath, then stands up, ready to go find him. Our girl gently tells her not to say anything too harsh. Then Irene finds Felix alone, and the moment she sees his face, she grabs his cheeks and asks how he can be smiling right now. Felix touches his face and asks if she is angry. Irene says, of course, she is. Her voice starts breaking as she asks how he could stand there and say it would be fine even if it killed him. Tears form in her eyes before she can stop them. Irene's tears finally spill over, and she tells Felix it is genuinely painful to hear him talk that way. Felix looks at her and clarifies quietly that he never actually said he would die. Irene stops. He tells her to consider him dead instead. She stares at him, then realizes what he means, and her voice rises immediately. She calls him out for mixing his words around and making her panic for nothing. Felix asks if there is really a difference. Irene breaks it down for him. Being considered dead means giving up his title, his reputation, his honor, everything he has built. For something he did not even do wrong. He would have to disappear and live like a ghost. Felix just smiles and says something like that. Our girl asks if she can hit him. He asks if it would make her feel better. Felix tells her not to worry so much on his behalf. Titles and fame and honor mean nothing to him. Everyone chases their own values, and this is not a sacrifice in his eyes. He says he is more selfish than he appears. He pats her head as he says it. Irene asks what values he is actually chasing. Felix just smiles and says she already knows the answer. Irene turns her face away, then pulls out a cloak and a sword from seemingly nowhere and says they should move before anyone else gets the chance to act first. Felix stares at the weapons, wondering where on earth she was hiding those. Irene then pulls out medicine and starts applying it to his injuries herself. Midway through, she pauses and asks why he never treated himself. Felix admits he took the beating partly to appease his father. Irene tells him that it is ridiculous. He leans closer and asks if she cannot just do it for him with that expression on his face. Our girl goes completely red. She pokes the medicine onto his wound a little harder than necessary and tells him to stop being so nosy. Felix smiles through it and tells her his resistance is better than anyone's. He is completely fine. Irene tells Felix he should not have held everything in like that. Felix looks at her and says simply forgive me. Just those two words. Quiet and sincere. Irene tells him he should not smile while saying something like that. Felix laughs anyway and says she is always so refreshingly straightforward. It is the kind of moment that feels warm and easy, which makes what comes next hit so much harder. That night, the scene shifts into something completely different. Bodies on the floor, Count Chamberlain, Olivia. And Felix is standing in the middle of it all, holding a man he just killed with blood everywhere. Claudia walks in and sees all of them. Her parents, her brother, all of them are gone. She calls out to each of them one by one with her eyes wide open. Then she looks at Felix and asks who he is. Felix turns to her and says, "He killed everyone in her family. Every single one." Claudia stands there with tears streaming down her face, unable to process what she is seeing. And then Irene jolts awake, sweating, gasping, heart pounding. That dream was cruel in a way that felt too specific to be random. She sits there in the dark, trying to understand why her mind went there before a knock at the door pulls her back to reality. Breakfast is ready. At the table, Claudia is her usual bright self, asking if Irene slept well. Irene gives a short answer and asks where Felix and the others are. Claudia says their father left early, Felix went with him, and their mother is still resting. Then Claudia starts cheerfully talking about buying a ship and sailing around the world with the whole family and living on an island. Irene is barely holding it together on the inside. Claudia notices and calls her name softly. Our girl looks at her, pauses, then says she did not want to bring this up so early in the morning, but Claudia should not be surprised by what she is about to hear. The rain is pouring and thunder is cracking outside when Felix picks up a letter and says quietly that the time has finally come. Irene asks if he is really going through with it. He pats her head and tells her not to worry too much. She starts to say something, but he turns around before she can finish. He tells her he will be back, then walks out into the storm. What happens next is hard to watch. Felix is on the ground, bleeding. Benjamin stands over him completely unbothered and says it pains even him to see someone suffering this long. He says it will be over soon. The way he says it is somehow worse than if he had been angry. Lucas shows up shortly after and taps Benjamin on the shoulder, telling him he is wasting time on useless things. Benjamin asks him not to disturb his only hobby. Lucas tells him to wrap it up and leave. Benjamin asks if Lucas is going to clean himself up before seeing Claudia. Lucas tells him to shut up. Benjamin shrugs and turns back to continue. Then Felix does something nobody expected. Flat on the ground and bleeding out, he musters just enough to hit Benjamin with a small burst of magic directly to the ankle. Benjamin stumbles, then looks down at his foot and smiles. He actually compliments Felix for still having that kind of precision while half dead. He then turns casually to Constantine and asks if his foot is curable, like he is reporting a minor inconvenience. Constantine looks disgusted. He says he wants no part of this combination and that this is absolutely the first and last time he gets involved in something like this. Benjamin tells him he has no intention of stopping, and that Constantine is free to leave if he wants. Constantine stares at him and says his beliefs have been completely shattered today, calls him shameless to his face. Benjamin shrugs off Constantine's disgust and points out that he chose to participate himself, so the sudden moral outrage is a bit late. Then, he crouches down and holds a flame in his palm. He grabs Felix's chin and blows smoke directly into his face. He tells Felix he will forgive him for the ankle attack. Felix responds by slashing at him again with what little magic he has left. Benjamin sighs and tells him to calm down because using magic in this state will send him into shock. Then he does something unexpected. He holds his cigarette to Felix's mouth and tells him to inhale. Felix coughs violently. Benjamin says calmly that the smoke will dull the pain for a while. Not long, but enough time to send his thoughts back to his family, to the person he carries in his heart. He tells Felix that fighting until death would only result in his being completely consumed by the demon. Better to have a conversation and go peacefully. He takes out a ring and holds it up, says he is going to pass along something a certain lady once told him. He cannot quite remember the exact words, but he is going to find out first. He stands up and walks away, saying they will meet again. Goodbye. Constantine follows without looking back. The moment they are gone, Felix exhales and says, "Damn it." Then the entire building erupts in fire. His glasses sit on the ground. The flames grow. And somehow, through all the blood and destruction, Felix says quietly that he feels refreshed, asks himself where they should begin. Later that night, someone enters Irene's room while she is sleeping. She sits up half awake, asking who is there. She opens her eyes. And standing in front of her is Felix, covered in blood from head to toe. He stretches his hand toward her. Our girl's eyes go wide, and she screams his name. Felix pats Irene's head softly and tells her he's back, smiling through what is clearly a tremendous amount of pain. Irene stares at him and completely loses it. She's looking at him like he just crawled out of a battlefield, screaming about how badly he's bleeding and jumping toward him in full panic mode. But Felix, being Felix, just tells her to stop whining. She's begging him to let her help him walk and get treatment. Right in the middle of all that concern, a voice cuts through his head telling him to make her happy with hell's pleasure. Felix doesn't even blink. He just mentally tells that voice to shut up. I would have been just as dramatic as Irene, honestly. Now, the story rewinds to show us what actually went down before that building caught fire. Felix is flat on the floor, bleeding out, and instead of panicking, Bro is having a full philosophical moment. He thinks about his 20 years of life and realizes there's still magic left in him. He picks up a cigarette, lights his ring with it, then pulls the arrow straight out of his own chest and drops it on the floor like it's nothing. He reaches out mentally to a being and opens negotiations, half his body and soul in exchange for tremendous power. That being turns out to be Lecrae's, and he is absolutely thrilled about the offer. He starts hyping up the deal, asking Felix if he can feel the power rushing through him. Felix accepts because there is simply no other choice. But even after sealing the deal, Lecrae won't stop talking. He keeps pushing for more control, going from half to a third. Just trying to get a bigger piece of Felix. Felix finally tells him to be quiet because his head is pounding. Lecrae is genuinely shocked he got a response at all. Felix sets his one condition. Lecrae stays quiet inside his body. Lecrae mutters about ending up inside a crazy guy. Felix tells him to watch his language. Absolute power move. Lecrae gets serious fast. He tells Felix he knows exactly what the magic on that arrow does. It erased his mind over and over. And then he drops the real bombshell. Felix didn't go through all of that to save his family. He did it for a child whose memory he even wiped himself. Lecrae throws that in his face and says he's no angel. Felix doesn't flinch. He just says he acts according to his fate. Lecrae keeps pushing, mocking him, asking how he plans on getting revenge without even touching demonic power. But Felix is completely unbothered. He shuts Lecrae down mid-sentence and then does something absolutely unhinged. He uses his power to burn the entire building down, including his own body, and then has the nerve to say he feels refreshed. Lecrae is speechless. Back in the present, Felix finishes telling Irene everything, and she completely boils over. She cannot believe how calm he is sitting there narrating something this insane, like it's a bedtime story. Felix pauses and starts to apologize, but his mind is already drifting somewhere darker. He starts thinking about how dangerous it is that Lecrae feeds on victory. Our girl notices something shift in him and calls his name, but Felix can't hear her because Lecrae is already deep in his head, whispering, telling him he can't hold on much longer, telling him he only wants to see himself reflected in Irene's eyes. He wants her crying and begging. Our male lead grips the bedsheet tightly. His eyes stay locked on Irene. She's standing there, confused, watching him stare at her like something is very wrong. And then Felix goes down on one knee in front of her. Whatever Lecrae is doing inside his head right now is clearly winning. And this is exactly where things start to get terrifying. Felix tells Claudia to get out of his room immediately. He warns her that his current state is dangerous. She asks if it's because of the demon's artifact, but he says nothing. So she does something that clearly breaks through his walls. She grabs his hand and tells him it doesn't matter how he changes because Felix will always be Felix. She reminds him she already promised to follow him even to hell. She's just glad he came back safely. And for a moment, it feels like everything might be okay. But Felix's hand starts trembling. He pulls it away from her and thinks to himself that he can't do this. Irene asks why he keeps avoiding her. He calls her name softly and apologizes for waking her up, tells her she must be tired and to go back to sleep. Irene is not having it. She refuses to sleep under these circumstances, but Felix turns his face away and thanks her for treating his wound before telling her they'll continue tomorrow. She asks if she can at least stay and take care of him. He stays silent for a long, painful moment before finally saying her name and telling her to just leave. The second those words leave his mouth, tears fill Irene's eyes immediately. She stands up and says she understands. On her way out, she quietly tells him she'll call a physician just in case. Then she closes the door, and Felix is left sitting there alone. So Lecrace, being Lecrace, wastes no time. He calls Felix inhuman for resisting demonic temptation and admits he's never seen anything like him in thousands of years. Felix tells him to stop trying to push him toward disgusting things. Lecrace asks if he's a virgin. Felix says yes and tells him to shut up. The next morning, Lecrace wakes him up with a brilliant idea involving Irene. Felix sits up, already tired of this conversation. Lecrace starts explaining his billions of years' worth of techniques. Felix gets up and shuts it all down immediately. He says he won't lay a finger on her without her permission. Lecrace calls his face a waste and tells him to just seduce her. Felix looks genuinely disgusted. Felix stands in front of the mirror, having what might be the most unhinged morning conversation anyone has ever had with their own reflection. He calls Lecrace out for claiming to be the demon of lust and pleasure while knowing nothing about love. Lecrace responds through Felix's reflection with a completely straight face that true love starts with a physical relationship. Felix ignores that and unwraps his bandages to find his body completely healed overnight. Lecrace cackles and tells him this is just the beginning. The longer Felix restrains him, the more influence he gains over the body. They will eventually synchronize. Felix stares at his fully healed chest in genuine shock, but refuses to give Lecrace the satisfaction. He throws his shirt on and tells him to be quiet because he's heading out. Lecrace simply says understood. Suspiciously cooperative for a demon. Outside his room, Felix finds our girl asleep on the floor right in front of his door. She clearly never left. She wakes up startled, and he tells her to go back to her room. But Irene is already studying him, and something feels off to her. No glasses. Sharper than usual. Smiling less. And then her eyes land on his chest, and she catches herself immediately. She slaps both hands on her head, wondering what she's thinking about someone who is supposed to be injured. She reaches out to touch his shoulder and asks how he's feeling. Felix tells her the demon's power healed him and to please stop touching him. Just then, Irene slips, and Felix catches her instantly. But his grip bruises her hand. She sees it and asks if that too is the demon's power. He says yes. She hides her hand behind her back and tells him not to worry. Felix immediately says he's calling the physician. She said it just aches a little, like that's supposed to be reassuring. He steps back to give her space, and she tells him he doesn't have to stand so far away. Then she compares him to a tiny hamster and says, as long as you're gentle, it's fine. Felix looks at her and says quietly that he might hurt her badly someday. And the way he says it makes it clear he's not talking about her hand. Irene folds her arms and hits back immediately. She tells Felix that someone who just had his shoulder pierced through has no business talking like that. Felix says this has nothing to do with her. But Irene is not backing down. She tells him he's just as much an innocent victim and that she'd rather get hurt than watch him get hurt. It's the same for her. Felix gets quiet and says some wounds cannot be healed, like water spilled on the floor. Our girl pauses and admits that's true. But then she smiles and tells him that if it's Felix, she will be fine no matter what he does. And that smile completely breaks him. Felix covers his face with both hands and admits he's still holding back right at this very moment. That if she knew what he actually wanted to do to her, she never would have said those words. Irene stands there trying to figure out what desire he could mean. Her mind even goes to whether he wants to kill her. Just then, Felix starts coughing violently and drops to the ground. Blood hits the floor. Irene screams his name. He tells her it's just his body resisting the artifact and warns her not to come near him. He eventually stands up and walks back into his room without a word, leaving her standing there alone. But then he steps back out holding a sword. He hands it to Irene and tells her that if he does something detestable, she should stab him with it because it will bring him back to his senses. Irene takes it and then immediately panics, realizing what she just agreed to. Felix calmly suggests they go see the rest of the family, like he didn't just hand someone a weapon to use on him. As they walk down the corridor, Lecrace starts gloating in his head, telling Felix that Irene clearly has feelings for him and calling him an idiot for missing it. Felix snaps out loud, telling him enough. Irene jumps and asks if she did something wrong. Felix quietly says nonsense keeps running through his head. Irene just blinks and says, nonsense? Felix mutters something about not tolerating another insult, and Irene is completely lost. She has no idea he's having a whole separate argument with Lecrace inside his head. She just sees him talking to himself and decides to move on. As they walk, she brings up something important. Even though they covered things up with the fake death story, they still need to stay cautious because those three could use it against them. But at least the artifact is out of his shoulder, so the magic constraint is gone. Felix then casually drops that he can't use magic anymore either. Our girl stops walking. She needs him to repeat that. He explains that every time he touches his mana, Lacrosse interferes. Then he looks at his hand and tries to explain it in the simplest way possible. His mana is the size of a mansion compared to the average person's cup. Lacrosse is feeding off that mana just to stay alive inside him. A normal person would have died already, but Felix is different. As long as he doesn't use magic, he won't die. Irene is standing there in complete shock, trying to process all of this. Felix says it like he's reading a grocery list. This man could announce the apocalypse and still sound unbothered. He adds one final instruction before opening the door. If he uses magic, it feels like a piece of his soul gets swallowed by the demon. He tells Irene that if he starts behaving strangely, she needs to stab him immediately. Then he calmly asks if they should head in. They walk through the door to find Claudia, his mom, and his dad all waiting. Claudia spots him and calls out to her brother. Felix smiles and says her name softly. She runs straight into his arms and hugs him tight. Then Irene steps forward, clearly about to do the same. But instead of a hug, she pulls back and slaps him clean across the face. The entire room goes dead silent. Everyone is frozen. Nobody saw that coming, not even Irene herself. Everyone is still frozen in shock. Our girl quietly calls out Claudia's name like she's trying to hold the room together. Claudia turns to Felix and starts talking. Her voice is steady at first. She tells him people announced his death, that there were plans for a funeral, that his reputation is so great that people were volunteering to arrange memorials for him. She even asks sarcastically if she should congratulate him, and then the tears just fall. She puts her hand over her face and admits she wanted to hit him much harder, but that was her limit. Felix tells her it wasn't his fault, and then Claudia drops to the floor crying and says, she knows. She just hates that she couldn't do anything to help him. Felix gets down with her and holds her. The whole room is heavy. And then Irene claps her hands together and announces she's ready. Everyone looks up, confused. She suggests they go to the island for the summer holidays. Only Irene could grief break a room like that. Fast forward to the day of the fake burial. All four of them are standing in front of the casket. Irene is mentally running through the plan. Constantine, Benjamin, and Lucas cannot find out that Felix is alive. One is clueless. One has insane observation skills. The third one she's still figuring out. She turns to Claudia and asks if she can fake crying. Claudia tries. It is genuinely terrible. Irene immediately pivots and tells her to channel her anger instead. Anger that Felix sacrificed himself. Anger that she knew nothing until it was too late. Claudia asks how she would actually feel if her brother really died. Irene tells her it doesn't have to be sadness. Just show them the Claudia who can't see her brother anymore. Claudia goes quiet. Then she smiles and thanks her. At the ceremony itself, Claudia tells Lucas that Felix must be watching all this from above. Lucas agrees emotionally. Then Benjamin and the Crown Prince show up, and Benjamin starts laying it on thick about Felix's benevolent life and how even God must feel sorry for him. He turns to Constantine for agreement. Constantine tells him to stop making comments like that. Lucas immediately tells all of them to get lost because he has something to say to Claudia alone. These three showed up to a funeral and brought the drama with them. Benjamin flat out says he doesn't want to leave. Lucas is already losing his patience and shoves him away. He tells Benjamin to stop interfering in other people's business and that there are times when you should excuse yourself. Benjamin just smiles and says that acting sneaky and going behind people's backs sounds boring to him. He'd rather just watch. Then Lucas turns to Constantine and tells him to leave too. Constantine also says he doesn't want to. Lucas completely loses it and calls them both out for never listening to anything he says. Our girl is watching all of this unfold and thinks it's strange. These are the men who killed Felix. And yet here they are at his funeral without even a hint of guilt. She even notices Benjamin didn't bring his usual cigarette. Something feels off. But before she can think further, she glances at Claudia and sees her hand already rising. Irene's stomach drops. And then Claudia punches Lucas so hard that blood flies from his mouth. The guards erupt. Everyone in the room freezes, including Count Chamberlain and his wife. Lucas sits on the floor holding his face while his guards rush to him. He tells them he's fine and orders everyone out. Lucas is still on the floor when Claudia towers over him and tells him he dares to show up here with that shameless face. Lucas smiles. An evil, slow smile. He tells her she's finally looking at him and that now she's attacked him, no one would object to throwing her in prison. Claudia doesn't flinch. She tells him straight that she knows exactly who killed her brother, that he deserves every ounce of her wrath, and that she will never forgive him. Lucas says he should be happy regardless. Then his eyes slide directly to Irene. He says slowly that she should know who is next, and to be careful. Irene clocks everything in that moment. She already suspected she was the next target. But what unsettles her more is Constantine. He hasn't said much. He's just been staring at her the entire time, and something about that stare is far more dangerous than anything Lucas just said. The story rewinds briefly to show us the moment Claudia said her brother must be watching from heaven, and Lucas agreed with that fake sincerity. Now, Irene is standing there running through everything she knows about these three. Benjamin, the one who commits evil with a smile as if it's nothing. Constantine, a priest who uses the devil's artifact without shame. And Lucas, a crown prince who simply does not accept the word no. These are the men who killed Felix. And they're standing at his funeral as they belong there. Claudia quietly notes they've been lingering too long. Irene steps up and asks them directly if there's something they want to see. Constantine responds that killing her would be as easy as strangling a child, but he just doesn't see the point in killing pointlessly. He says it so casually, it's terrifying. Our girl is trying to process that when Benjamin cuts in with something worse. He says there was one thing Felix could never hide: his lust for Irene. Irene goes completely silent. She thinks through the word carefully. Then she looks at Benjamin and asks if insulting the dead makes him feel better. She tells him that not everything a person feels is communicated through their body. Constantine smiles and asks if it sounds like slander to her. He says it's unjust that Felix died before he could show his heart, and that there's no way to confirm he's truly gone. Irene looks at him and tells him she should give him a good beating. Claudia immediately says she's in. Irene backtracks and says she was joking. Claudia turns to the three of them and tells them to behave. Then she looks at Irene and says the funeral is starting. They need to go get their friends. And just like that, the two of them walk away, leaving those three standing there in their own tension. Lucas calls after Claudia, asking if it's really necessary to at least receive his condolences. Claudia doesn't even glance back. She just keeps walking. Lucas watches her go and mutters under his breath that he told them all to get lost. Then he turns to Constantine and says Felix's death was arranged because of him. Constantine doesn't respond. He just walks straight toward the casket. He places his hand on it and says that Felix was born so brutally that it was hard to identify him, that he was simply rescuing a poor boy from the magic department. Then he tells the casket to feel free to be as silent as it wants today. The audacity of this man standing at the funeral of someone he killed and calling it a rescue. The ceremony begins. The prayer that follows is genuinely beautiful. Words about how those who reach high will lower themselves and those who lower themselves will rise. That Felix was clearer than water and brighter than the autumn sky. That he declared to be reborn and rewalk these steps in the future. Even the priest admits it is something even he cannot fully understand. After the ceremony, people gather and murmur about how young Felix was. Someone says God must have cherished him too much to leave him here long. Meanwhile, Claudia spots the second prince, Cedric, across the crowd and starts mentally coaching herself to approach him. She decides to think of him as a woman and just go for it. But before she can move, our girl steps forward and smoothly asks Cedric if he has a moment to speak somewhere private. Cedric looks genuinely caught off guard. They step outside, and as they walk, he looks at her sideways and calls her a vicious woman for pulling something like this at a funeral. He says the word adultery with full confidence. Irene's mind goes completely blank. Cedric keeps talking and shifts his tone slightly. He says he didn't interact much with Felix personally, but heard enough about him to know his passing is genuinely heartbreaking. He looks out at the crowd mourning and calls them insects, wasting the world's oxygen in the same breath. Then he casually mentions that Felix once released some vermin he wanted to kill. Irene blinks and wonders internally if this man was literally bitten by bugs at some point. She collects herself and tells him that Felix had his reasons for saving those insects. That we can't understand the life of something smaller than us, and that even if his passing is a shame, she believes Felix stood firm in his beliefs and chose this ending himself. Then she thinks to herself that she definitely did not pull Cedric aside to talk about insects. Cedric smirks and tells her that her flattery skills are not bad, but she didn't need to beat around the bush. He would have done her the favor anyway. Then he steps closer and lifts her face toward his. He tells her he already knows what she wants, that she wants him to love her. He touches her face, then her lips. Says biting them, "Must feel really nice." Irene shoves him back immediately and tells him to keep his hands to himself. That is not why she called him out here. Cedric looks genuinely shocked. He asks what she actually wants then. Irene looks him dead in the eye and tells him she sees his potential. He scoffs. She tells him that jumping into fire recklessly makes a life pointless, and that she can help him live meaningfully. She says she needs him. He accuses her of trying to take advantage of him. Irene doesn't even blink. She tells him that if he's going to waste his life anyway, she might as well make use of it. Cedric asks if anyone has ever actually believed words like that. Irene smiles and says yes. Then she holds out a rolled paper. Cedric tells her he will come back after careful consideration. Our girl hands him the rolled paper and tells him to consider it carefully. He takes it and walks away. And as he goes, Irene is already thinking 3 steps ahead. She knows Cedric's story from the original plot. He was just a side character who helped the protagonist escape imprisonment and fled the kingdom alongside her. But Lucas caught them, called him a mediocre guy, and then ripped his heart out in front of Claudia. But what Irene understands that nobody else does is that Cedric didn't save Claudia just because he liked her. He was a man wandering through life with no purpose. Claudia was simply the trigger that finally made him choose something. That's exactly why he won't decline her offer. He's been waiting for a reason to matter. Irene rushes back toward the funeral, realizing she might be late. And that's when she runs into Duke Deplasian, who immediately asks if she's the Amber family's daughter. She confirms it and apologizes for keeping someone as busy as him waiting. He tells her flatly that he only came because Erica asked him to. Irene's eyes go wide, and she blurts out that she'll delete it. Duke Deplasian puts his hand on his head and tells her this is the first time Erica has ever asked for anything. He wants to know what Irene did to her. Our female lead says she simply shared another viewpoint of the world. He calls it debauchery. She calls it freedom. He tells her that as long as Erica doesn't regret her choice, he has no right to interfere. Then he says he wants Irene to stay at the Chamberlain household. Just like that, he turns and walks away. Irene slowly sinks to the floor in quiet sadness, processing everything. And then someone calls her name. She turns to look. Claudia is the one calling her name. She rushes over and asks where Irene has been and whether she's tired. Irene smiles and apologizes for worrying her. She says she kept running into strange people and is a little worn out, but the moment she saw Claudia, all her energy came back. Claudia immediately suggests they go eat something nice. Our girl agrees without hesitation. These two really are each other's recharge button. Later, Irene is staring at a map with deep concern. The Get You member should have made contact by now, and there's nothing. No news. She can feel something is wrong. She drops the map in frustration. Claudia appears behind her and tells her that staring at it won't solve anything. She drags Irene into packing for their trip instead. Irene lightens up immediately and starts listing who's coming. Just the 3 of them since the Count has to stay as patriarch, and Olivia isn't feeling well. Claudia bounces with excitement, saying this is the first time the 3 of them are going on a trip together. Irene reminds her that this isn't exactly a vacation. Claudia says she's still looking forward to it. Irene packs her clothes alongside self-defense tools and potions. She even considers making a new potion herself while holding a bottle up to the light. This is definitely not a normal trip packing. At the Chamberlain family's secret mansion, Irene finds Felix and wastes no time. She hands him a box full of potion bottles and explains that his face is too recognizable for a man who is officially dead. Felix opens one bottle and drinks it while Irene watches nervously. She thinks he looks exactly like a teacher grading homework, and the expression on his face is not encouraging. Felix swallows it and immediately asks who made this. Irene's mind goes completely blank. She starts panicking internally, trying to figure out what to say because whatever is on Felix's face right now does not look like a passing grade. Our girl admits sheepishly that she made it herself and asks if it's really that bad. Felix tells her it's actually good, considering it's her first attempt. Irene quietly corrects him that it was her 10th attempt. Felix pauses and says it's still good for a 10th try. Claudia lights up, asking if he really means it. Felix confirms, but adds that it has side effects and she must not consume it herself. Irene stands there trying to figure out if she just received a compliment or a criticism. Felix then asks if she's been studying potion making. She tells him it came to her suddenly yesterday and she just wanted to do something useful. He asks if she made it in one day without any formal training. Our girl points out she never even attended the academy, so where exactly would she have learned? Felix catches himself and apologizes. Irene waves it off immediately. But internally, she's thinking about all the loans she took just to get through school in her past life. There is absolutely no way she was going back to any classroom voluntarily. Felix smiles and tells her she's truly talented. Not as flattery, but as a genuine observation. Irene's face goes completely red. She tells him not to say it like that. He says it again anyway. She asks if she should make more. He offers to teach her sometime. She tries to decline, saying he's too busy. Felix laughs softly and says he's trying to make time, and asks her not to take his joy away. Irene thanks him, and then her eyes drift to his chest. The devil's power has clearly done something because things are looking noticeably different under that shirt. Irene's thoughts go somewhere completely unhinged before she slaps both hands over her eyes. Felix asks what's wrong. She tells him she thinks she's been possessed by a devil. He just stares at her, completely confused. That night, Felix wakes up feeling an intense heat rushing through his body. He thinks about how high recovery ability causes fatigue and stress afterward, and then his mind starts drifting. He imagines Irene above him, reaches out in his mind and touches her face, pulls her closer, then thinks quietly that it feels like a dream. Lecrace is absolutely winning this one. Felix is deep in the dream and tries to shut it down. He calls out to Lecrace but gets no response. Then the imaginary Irene calls his name, and something in him snaps. He pins her down and tells her to stop. But Lecrace starts speaking through the fake Irene's voice. Tells Felix this is what he truly wants. To hold her every day. Felix is sweating and tells Lecrace he clearly doesn't understand. Then the holy sword appears in his hand, and without hesitation, he stabs himself in the heart with it. Lecrace asks if he wants to perish together, but the fake Irene keeps speaking, telling Felix to stop pretending, that he's boiling on the inside while acting gentle on the outside, that he's been flustered ever since she arrived, and that makes him worse than any devil. Felix's eyes fly open. He's drenched in sweat. He thinks to himself that it was just a dream and tries to steady himself. Then he looks up, and Irene is standing right there in front of him, asking if he had a nightmare. He tells her he's fine, but internally, he thinks that just her presence alone is enough to burn him up. He raises his hand toward her and asks if she has the sword. Irene barely has time to respond before he pulls her closer and brings his face toward hers. It looks like he's about to kiss her. Then Irene calmly tells him she's just checking his temperature. She presses her hand to his forehead and tells him he's burning up and needs to lie down immediately. Felix lies back down. Irene watches him settle and thinks he looks exactly like a sleeping prince in an ice castle. Then Felix speaks quietly and asks how sad she would be if he died. Irene's eyes go wide. She immediately raises her voice and asks what on earth he's saying out of nowhere. She reminds him that he has survived situations that should have killed him already. Our girl tells him firmly not to dare die. She places a napkin on his forehead and Felix looks up at her and says that he was ready to go, but if it would make her sad, then he'll keep trying. Irene calls his name softly. Just his name, and somehow that says everything. Later, Felix hands Irene a heavy pile of books and documents. He tells her these are things he studied since childhood, and they would just collect dust otherwise. Our girl thanks him and asks if he got enough rest. He says he slept well. Then his expression shifts, and he tells her he's sorry, but he doesn't think he can teach her after all. Irene asks what's wrong. Felix turns his face away and admits he wants to avoid being alone with the two of them together. He hopes she understands. Irene simply says she sees, and the weight of that quiet response says more than any argument could. Later, Irene and Claudia arrive at the train, built through a collaboration of magic and alchemy. Claudia is beside herself with excitement and nearly tries to buy it on the spot. Irene has to talk her down. Once they're actually on board and moving, Claudia immediately sticks her head out the window like a puppy on a road trip. She starts listing everything she wants to do. Hotels, yachts, private jets. Our girl watches her and smiles. Claudia says this is the first time she's ever traveled without guardians. Irene says she's glad she's enjoying herself. Claudia says she's even happier knowing Irene feels that way. They agree to nap, and Claudia heads off to her cabin. The moment she's gone, Felix quietly asks Irene if she wants something sweet, like candy. Irene says no. Felix says he'll move to another cabin then and starts to stand. Irene stares at him. Something crosses her face. Confusion, sadness. And just as he moves past her, she reaches out and holds the hem of his shirt. She looks up at him with the most pitiful eyes and asks quietly if he can't just stay. Felix freezes and stares at her in complete shock. Felix catches himself immediately. He puts a hand over his face and tells Irene to listen. Irene stares at him, and her mind starts connecting dots. She remembers what Benjamin said about Felix desiring her. And then she actually sits with that thought. She imagines what it would be like to touch her lips to his, and then realizes she doesn't hate the idea at all. But before she can fully process that, Felix removes her hand from his shirt and asks why she won't listen to him. He walks away and tells her not to make him use force. Irene stands up immediately and grabs his hand. She tells him to stop and says he needs to take responsibility. Felix turns around, completely confused. She tells him he made her accustomed to having him around, and now he has to own that. Then she takes his hand and places it on her head, telling him to pat her like he used to. Felix's hand starts trembling. He spins her around and pushes her back, telling her to stop unless she wants to watch him lose his mind completely. Then he slams his hand into the wall so hard it cracks. He looks at the damage and almost laughs. He points out that the soundproofing in this room is so good that nobody came running even after he cracked the wall. Then he says slowly that it means nobody would notice, no matter what he did in here. The room goes very quiet. Irene looks at the cracked wall and tells him he could stand to be a little more gentle. Felix puts his face in his hands. And then he just says whatever. He gives up. And honestly, at this point, nobody blames him. Irene looks at Felix and asks plainly if he desires to kill her. Felix says absolutely not. So she lists every horrific thing she can think of. Breaking her limbs, gouging her eyes, ripping her heart out and hanging it up. Felix looks genuinely disturbed and asks if he could ever want any of that. Our girl smiles and says, then, what exactly is the problem? Felix tells her it's something that could ruin her. Irene doesn't even blink. She tells him she's tough, and not that easy to ruin. Felix looks at her like she's the most unhinged person he's ever met, and says it's remarkable she can still say that after witnessing everything she has. But Irene blocks his path again, and tells him that although she's not as sturdy as that cracked wall, she won't break even if he pushes hard. He knows that. Then she wraps her arms around him and tells him to just pat her head already. Felix slowly raises his hand and does it. Irene asks how it feels. Felix says it's hotter than a fever and sweeter than death. Inside Felix's mind, Lacrosse is losing it. He says she's more outrageous than expected and that it's only a matter of time before Felix breaks completely. But then another presence appears in his mind and cuts Lacrosse off. This being tells Lacrosse directly that he doesn't understand what love is. If human love were only about pleasure, then devils would have been enough. Lacrosse pushes back, saying, nothing is greater than a devil. The being disagrees. It says devils only exist because humans do. Then Lacrosse asks what human love actually is. And the being says it's angel and devil together, heaven and hell, joy and grief and wrath and happiness all at once. Nothing can fully describe it. Most humans carry love that leaves behind painful regrets, and this being stays with them through it all. To truly become complete, a devil must step into the human world, and then the being says quietly that it will soon be free. They finally reach the ocean, and Irene is already sensing that something is wrong. They meet with the ship's captain and ask about traveling to Kamoli Island. The captain's face shifts immediately. He tells them the ship itself is fine, but they simply cannot get near the island without risking their lives. Our girl points out that the sea is completely calm, no storms, nothing unusual. The captain explains that the moment any ship gets close to Kamoli Island, it begins to sink gradually until everyone on board is buried under the sea, like a deal with the devil. Felix asks why no superior authority has intervened. The captain explains that Kamoli Island is private territory claimed by the Pennells, so nobody is allowed to touch it. But recently, they discovered the Pennells sold the island and withdrew, and ever since, ships passing through that route have been recording at least 1 or 2 deaths every single time. Those people clearly angered something they shouldn't have. Irene and Claudia sit down to process everything. Our girl is spiraling. She mutters that people have already died and wonders out loud if every member of the Getchu has been eliminated. Then she says it out loud. asks if she's even human for sitting here eating while people are dying. Claudia immediately shoves a sandwich into her mouth mid-sentence. Irene says she's unworthy of the sandwich. Claudia is already 3 bites in and tells her she needs to eat to stay alive. Irene asks what they do now. Claudia smiles and says they simply buy their own ship. She reminds Irene about the crew she hired through an acquaintance. People trustworthy enough to agree to have their memories wiped after the mission. Irene feels slightly better. Then Claudia says brightly that this is her first time traveling this far, and she's genuinely excited. She tells Irene that shape-shifting magic has made her feel so free since people used to stare at her constantly. Felix is happy too, since it's been a long time since he last went out. Irene smiles softly at that, and then a bird swoops in and steals her sandwich clean out of her hand. This island is already cursed, and they haven't even gotten there yet. Irene screams about her stolen sandwich and immediately takes off sprinting after the bird. Claudia runs after Irene. The chase goes on until Irene completely runs out of energy and collapses on the ground, demanding the bird return her sandwich. But then she notices someone else lying on the ground nearby. She crawls over and asks if they're alive. The person suddenly coughs and wakes up. Irene asks if they're all right, and the boy says it's been a long time. Our girl agrees and then calls him Andrew. The boy immediately corrects her. His name is Anthony. Claudia shows up and says she's glad he's still alive. Anthony says he thought he was dead too. Irene picks a leaf off his head and tells him not to die. Anthony says in that case, she owes him double the danger pay. Negotiating his salary while half dead on the floor is actually impressive. Felix appears right behind them, having followed when they suddenly ran off. He looks Anthony over and notices something around his lips immediately. Without a word, he pulls out a bottle and tells him to drink. Anthony grabs it and gulps it down desperately. Irene watches and feels genuinely guilty for not thinking of water sooner. She looks at Felix and introduces Anthony as Andrew again. Anthony turns his head slowly and asks how she keeps getting his name wrong. They're completely different names. Irene asks if he can walk. Felix says he looks like he can barely breathe. Then Felix crouches down and lifts Anthony onto his back without any discussion. Anthony looks up at him and genuinely asks if he's an angel. Felix asks about the rest of the crew. Anthony says they should still be alive, but they need to be rescued immediately. Irene says rescue out loud like the word itself is heavy. Felix goes quiet and says he can hear sounds coming from the island. Wailing sounds. Everyone turns and stares toward it. Irene instinctively moves closer to Felix. Anthony watches the two of them and thinks to himself that they're all about to potentially die, and these two are still acting like this. Then Claudia steps up and holds Felix's hand too. Anthony gives up entirely. Out on the ocean, Anthony is practically bouncing off the deck because he thinks this sailing trip to Kamali Island is going to make him super rich. An older sailor chuckles at the kid's enthusiasm, but talk about terrible timing, because the sea decides to ruin his mood real quick. The wind completely flips on them without warning. Dark fog rolls over the water, and the compass in Anthony's hands starts spinning around like crazy. That sudden shift terrifies the poor kid so much that he's dripping cold sweat, knowing something completely wrong is happening around them. Anthony narrates the story for them while scarfing down food and chugging water like he hasn't eaten in a week, telling everyone what actually went down out there. Turns out his entire world went upside down, soaking him completely as if he'd been tossed straight into the ocean. He describes wandering through a creepy forest filled with mindless, zombie-like people before finally passing out and somehow making it back to the water to survive. Hearing all that crazy stuff should have taken center stage, but Irene is mostly sitting there getting completely annoyed by Anthony's sloppy table manners and ridiculously loud chewing. Meanwhile, Irene is actually piecing the mystery together. Rather than brushing this off as a standard monster attack, she realizes they're likely dealing with an unusual spirit that promotes life and healing. She gets so lost in deep thought that she abruptly slumps her head right onto the dining table. That little move instantly pushes Anthony over the edge, causing him to snap at her for lying on the dining table. Irene then complains about being stuck surrounded by fools. Naturally, that triggers Anthony to scream right back at her, demanding to just finish his meal without everyone constantly nagging him. At this point, I don't even blame her, but there's no time to keep bickering inside. Outdoors, along a rose-lined street, Claudia lays out the harsh reality of their situation. She makes it crystal clear that turning back isn't an option, because failing to secure this spirit right now leaves them completely helpless against future threats. She'd rather risk it all than spend the rest of her life accomplishing nothing. That speech gets our girl on board to prepare for departure despite her quiet panic over amnesia magic. Their mercenary guide casually reminds them that risking their necks is just a normal Tuesday in his line of work. With everyone aligned, they board the ship and head right back into the open sea. As the ship closes in on the mysterious island, the tension on the deck ramps up fast. Someone dramatically declares that she's totally ready to lay down her life if things turn dangerous. But the mercenary quickly interrupts her gloomy mood by pointing out the horizon. Ancient stone structures are rising right out of the lush green shoreline. Looking at those detailed patterns, Felix recognizes them as old symbols tied to forgotten local beliefs. That makes our girl wonder out loud if time itself somehow moved backward. But before anyone can process that thought, a violent impact slams into the hull. It knocks our girl completely off her feet. Felix doesn't hesitate for a second. He lunges forward and catches her tightly in his arms. The second he gets his footing back, he turns away. He's bright red. He's stammering out a super flustered apology while she tries to regain her composure. That sweet moment doesn't last long, though. A short-haired spirit user senses that the local spirits are shaking in terror, proving a massive spiritual force is lurking right in front of them. The hooded spellcaster offers to teleport everyone onto the land. But Felix warns her against it because the surrounding space is so violently twisted that it forms an isolated pocket realm that will reject anyone trying to force their way in. To actually test his theory, a blonde archer steps up. He draws his bow all the way back, and he fires an arrow straight at the island's boundary. The second the arrow hits the air, it crashes into an invisible honeycomb barrier. It freezes in midair, and it completely disintegrates into nothing. That leaves the spellcaster genuinely impressed by how much Felix knows, though he just casually brushes it off by saying he's simply burdened with too many thoughts. But just as our Irene starts anxiously figuring out what their next step should be, her heart completely drops. Claudia has somehow stepped onto the ship's outer railing, standing completely still and totally zoned out while eerie white feathers float around her body. Before anyone can even shout her name or reach out to grab her, a massive explosion and a freak wave blast directly into the ship's side. The blast knocks our girl hard onto the deck, leaving her collapsed on the wood. She frantically stretches her arm out into the air, screaming Claudia's name at the top of her lungs. As Claudia slips off the railing, she falls backward and sinks deep into the dark blue ocean below. As consciousness slowly comes back to our girl, the soothing sound of ocean waves is the first thing she hears. She's lying on a sandy shore with a throbbing headache, dazed about how she ended up here. But when she tries to move, she realizes she can't budge because something solid is wrapping tightly around her. She reaches down to feel what's holding her, only to realize she's lying directly on top of warm human flesh. Her eyes snap open, and sure enough, Felix is right underneath her. He's fast asleep with his arms locked around her. Looking at his face, a rush of embarrassment washes over her as she thinks about how handsome he looks. But she quickly snaps out of it, reminding herself that now isn't the time for that. She needs to get up immediately, but his grip is absurdly strong. She nudges him, calling his name to wake him up. Felix stirs with a heavy sigh, flinching as his eyes open and sleepily noting a sweet scent. When she asks if he remembers what happened, Felix lazily asks if she's talking about the sudden turn of events from last night. That catches her off guard because he brought up last night before she even said a word. The moment Felix realizes their posture, he panics. He lets go immediately, backing off with endless apologies. Irene reassures him it's fine, laughing off the awkwardness by bringing up how crazy things were on the train. She asks why he was holding her so tight. Felix admits that before passing out, his instincts kicked in to protect her from getting hurt. Grateful, she thanks him, realizing his protection kept her completely unharmed. Felix offers a hand to help her stand, suggesting they inspect the area, and she agrees. Together, they explore the area, walking into the forest near the beach toward an ancient temple. Surveying the site, our girl realizes this structure is the same building seen outside the island. She concludes that the sea actually serves as a spatial path. Felix confirms her theory, adding that the warm spring climate here is totally different from the outside world. She agrees, suddenly noticing how cold she feels with her wet dress clinging to her skin. Before they can dwell on that, two young boys in ancient white tunics run past them. One of them is wearing a flower wreath. Looking at their clothes, he notes that their outfit matches what people wore 4,000 years ago. Irene is impressed and asks how he knows such historical details. Turns out the fragment of Lares's soul informed him. She asks if he can communicate with it directly, then pulls out a floating magic soul crystal fragment of his own. He lets out a sigh, complaining that Lares's soul fragment is super annoying because it literally never stops talking. Meanwhile, the kids run around shouting that outsiders are present. The children approach them carrying a food basket with warm bread and wine, but their cheerful expressions instantly turn eerily firm. The boy hands over the basket, demanding they eat the food and wear the fresh clothes. Our girl thanks them and asks if she should change out of her wet clothes first, but the child insistently demands they eat first. Sensing the tension, Felix steps forward with a gentle smile to ease things over. He thanks the children for helping them avoid hunger and cold, then asks if they've eaten yet. The children reply with an eerie calm that they don't need to eat because they don't get hungry. Rather than stepping back, Felix kneels. He takes a piece of warm bread and offers it back. He tells them that eating well will help them grow up big and tall like him. Reluctantly, the children take the bread and eat. While they're chewing, Felix asks why they brought food and clothing. The child explains that the Lord invited outsiders, requiring them to provide supplies. When Felix asks why the Lord invited them, The child answers that it's because Olympia likes it. Felix asks who Olympia is, and the child clarifies that Olympia is the spirit of life, who loves festivals. This makes every day a non-stop festival. Hearing that title makes our girl gasp in shock. Hope fills her heart as she realizes that if the spirit of life is present, Claudia can finally make a contract with it. Their duty finished, the children cheer, they wave goodbye, and they run off into the forest. Our girl waves back and tells them to take care, but watching them go, an uneasy feeling creeps in. She asks Felix if those children were actually alive. Felix's tone turns dead serious. He reveals that those children died 4,000 years ago, explaining that a dead person can't come back to life no matter how much time is turned back. Our girl points out that they didn't seem like a hallucination at all. Felix clarifies that while not a hallucination, they're a fleeting illusion, an empty shell without a soul. Turns out, someone seems to be desperately trying to hold on to this illusion at all costs. With those heavy thoughts in mind, the two of them walk together toward the ancient temple. Our story kicks off in a pitch-black void where Claudia finds herself completely lost and terrified, frantically calling out for Irene and her brother. That panic turns to pure horror when Duke Rember steps out of the gloom to confront her. Rember doesn't waste a second. He tears her down. He tauntingly asks if she plans on leeching off other people her entire life. He mocks her for clinging to Lady Amber. He sneers that since she's collapsing into her own personal hell, he won't even need to lift a finger to destroy her. He warns her that if she stays this stubborn, every single person she cares about will abandon her. To make matters worse, he claims Felix is already dead and gone. This leaves Amber all alone. And he blames Claudia for bringing death to everyone around her. Calling her weak, pathetic, and way too soft, he boasts that her kind nature makes it ridiculously easy for him to break her. Standing right beside the Duke is a silent guy decked out in royal armor, quietly taking in the whole scene while Rember tells Claudia to just give up. That's just downright cruel. But she isn't breaking that easily. Refusing to swallow his poison, Claudia snaps back. She declares that she's going to change and become stronger. She clenches her fists and unleashes a massive wave of glowing power, catching the Duke off guard for a second. Rember merely smirks, amused by her sudden fight. He acts like he's looking forward to her trying while remaining completely convinced that she's doomed to fail anyway. Even as she pushes forward through the dark space, Rember's nasty insults keep haunting her. They echo in her mind like a broken record. His voice constantly reminds her that she's nothing more than a pretty, useless doll who can't protect anyone. It tells her that all her efforts are pointless. It asks why she doesn't just give up and die since everyone around her is cursed to perish. The sheer weight of those words really gets under her skin, leaving her quietly wondering who else is suffering right now. That heavy mood suddenly gets cut short as the scene shifts over to a bright, lush forest garden. Irene snaps out of her surprise as Felix steps out from behind the trees wearing a matching white toga outfit. Irene's totally stunned by his new look, playfully teasing him that he looks like the sun god come to life, though she can't help worrying about where Claudia went and whether she's actually safe. Felix reassures her and suggests they get something to eat before setting off, pulling a snack right out of a magic bag he prepped before boarding their boat. Irene devours the treat, finding it a bit salty but super delicious anyway. Once she finishes eating, she pulls out a set of special ring artifacts she put together for their trip. Felix hesitates for a second. But Irene completely ignores his doubt and gently slides one of the rings onto his finger so they're properly equipped for whatever comes next. With their gear set, the two head straight toward the massive castle of Aelios. Irene starts striking goofy poses to show off her new ring. She talks about how comfortable her toga feels, but Felix is having a total meltdown. She feels practically naked in her outfit and keeps aggressively turning her gaze away from him. Felix teases her for refusing to look at him, completely clueless that she's actually losing her mind over how ridiculously handsome he looks in that toga. She forces herself to snap out of her embarrassment as they finally step onto the busy castle grounds. Right as they walk into the open courtyard, a server greets them with a tray full of free drinks. Rather than feeling welcomed, Felix finds this whole carefree setup ridiculously suspicious. Desperate to figure out how to meet the local lord, he decides to break up the chill party vibe by intentionally smashing a wine glass onto the stone floor to force everyone's attention onto him. Talk about a dramatic way to make an entrance. A nearby bard casually strolls over and explains that all the food, drinks, and entertainment are totally free for everyone, because nobody actually works in this castle. Everyone just hangs out and parties. Irene plays along with a sarcastic smirk, but she immediately pivots into a massive theatrical speech. She dramatically proclaims that she's so overwhelmed by the Lord's incredible generosity that she just has to thank him in person. She asks why such a wonderful ruler isn't out here enjoying the party and demanding to share a drink with him. The bard just scoffs, asking why the Lord would ever care to get a drink with an outsider like her. But Felix immediately steps up to back Irene, asking what could be wrong with sharing a drink. Before their argument can escalate any further, a commanding green-haired guy who turns out to be the Lord himself comes gliding smoothly through the air completely barefoot. He demands to know what all the fuss is about, casually asking what could be so interesting down here. But right as the Lord starts questioning the crowd, things take a terrifying turn. A sinister dark silhouette with glowing red eyes and a menacing aura manifests directly behind Felix. The dark entity sneers right into Felix's ear, dripping with pure hatred as it calls him a devil bastard for having the absolute nerve to crawl into their domain. Things immediately kick off in the palace corridor with pure tension, where Felix is downright furious. He curses out the demonic bastard standing nearby because he can still sense that sickening, foul stench from a distance. Irene is right beside him in a complete panic, wondering why her erasing magic still reacts to Felix even with the devil standing right there. She starts questioning if the Lord is even human at all, and our guy couldn't agree more with her utter hatred for the beast. But unfortunately for them, that's the exact moment a wild, unhinged demon decides to crash the party. He provocatively taunts them both, casually bragging that if they came down here to die, he'll gladly kill them right now. He adds that Arista will be overjoyed watching them bleed. He even mocks our guy's magic, asking if he's using the devil out of pure self-hatred. Naturally, Felix isn't taking that disrespect. He coldly shoots back that it depends on who started this war, instantly charging up a glowing spell circle. Talk about zero hesitation. But instead of backing off, the demon loses his mind. He laughs and dares our guy to do his worst while screaming at them to run so he can hunt them down to the end. And before anyone can react, a colossal magic explosion tears through the entire palace. In another scene, Claudia collapses onto the pitch-black floor of an ominous mind space, completely exhausted from the impact. But even though her body is giving out, her spirit isn't broken. Sitting up with pure determination, she fiercely shouts at her shadowy pursuer to shut up. Eerie, unseen voices keep echoing through the void, telling her to give up already. They tell her to stop wasting stamina, and they tell her to just wait for someone else to save her, but she refuses to play the victim. She pushes herself right back onto her feet, screaming back into the darkness. She boldly reveals that she's been watching this parasitic entity just as long as it's been stalking her, declaring that its own toxic thoughts will keep it trapped in this void forever. She vows that even if it follows her like a plague, nothing changes because she will keep climbing to the top no matter how powerless she feels. She promises to fight until the very end. With that fire burning inside her, she reaches into the dark for friendly spirits. She begs for a sliver of light. Remembering flowing water from earlier, she calls for Nick. Sensing a breeze nearby, she invokes Sylphid and even calls out to Earthworm for guidance. When nothing answers, she sighs. She thinks no spirits exist in a place like this until an orange flame suddenly flares up right beside her. Surprised and overjoyed, she wonders if Salamander was beside her all along. She's amazed that a spirit's power could feel this warm. But turns out, it's not just a basic spirit. A gentle, noble woman approaches her through the light. She explains that she came the moment she heard the child's desperate voice calling out. She reveals that she was the one who summoned her to this peaceful stone temple corridor. She was hoping the girl would overcome her struggles on her own before stepping in when help was truly needed. Recognizing her voice, Claudia takes her hand, and the woman warmly promises to help her whenever obstacles get in her way. Driven by pure eagerness, Claudia practically begs to form an independent contract right on the spot. She promises to work as hard as she can so the spirit never suffers. That completely catches the woman off guard. Hearing a human child make such a selfless promise makes her laugh softly with genuine affection. She points out that with the girl's insane spirit affinity, summoning a spirit king wouldn't even be a problem. But since normal spirits physically couldn't contract in a place like this, she came down in person. Clenching her fists with absolute resolve, our girl stresses just how desperate she really is. She pledges to leave peacefully once the contract is settled. When asked why she's so set on making a contract, our girl reveals her true motivation. She doesn't want power for revenge. She just wants to protect the people she cares about and stand proudly on her own 2 feet. The woman gently explains that contracting with a spirit isn't about walking alone, but finding a true companion for the journey. This makes our girl realize she had completely misunderstood how spirits think. Gazing at the starry sky, the woman admits she was testing her at first to see what kind of person she was. She apologizes if she offended her. She then asks if she can trust our girl with a favor. She touches her glowing jewel pendant as she explains she can no longer reach out on her own. She asks if they can hold out their hands to save each other. As the floating jewel drifts toward our girl, the two of them walk together down the hallway into an ancient altar room. There, a vine-wrapped wooden chest pulses with a steady heartbeat before a runic stone monument surrounded by flowers. High above the forest canopy, things are going completely out of control. Felix is flying through the air while holding onto Irene, trying his best to make a desperate escape. But their attacker isn't letting them off easy. This green-haired guy comes leaping straight up out of nowhere, screaming in frustration and firing off massive blasts of magic. One of those attacks hits Felix dead on, forcing an agonized scream out of him as he coughs up blood midair. Even while taking brutal damage, he refuses to let go of our girl. He even mutters that all those grueling magic practice sessions back at the mansion were totally worth it. Our girl freaks out the second she sees him bleeding, desperately asking if he's going to be okay. Felix just tells her to hang on tight because she might fall, showing off an insane level of endurance that honestly blows her mind. But before they can even figure out their next move, the attacker gets completely fed up with playing tag. He summons a massive wave of giant tree roots and vines rising straight out of the forest canopy, cutting off their escape. Felix barely has time to yell out a warning before the pressure becomes too much, sending both of them crashing down to the forest floor. There, Felix instantly drops unconscious. Olympia lands right in front of them, stepping forward with lethal intent. But instead of running away, Irene stands her ground and places herself directly between the attacker and Felix's limp body. Olympia pauses, feeling out the magic lingering around Felix. He notices that it's actually pure magic rather than devil power, which confuses him. But he quickly decides it doesn't matter. He coldly commands our girl to get out of the way, but she doesn't back down for a second. When he asks if she wants to die before her friend, she completely turns the tables on him by calling out his true motivation. She accuses him of hating the devil because this very island was used as a portal to the demon realm, costing him everything he ever cared about. That hits a raw nerve, forcing the attacker to pause with a dark look in his eyes. But our girl isn't done pushing his buttons. She tells him straight up that Felix locked the devil inside his own body, specifically so nobody else would ever have to go through that nightmare. She calls him a hero who saved countless lives. The attacker scoffs at that. He argues that if Felix really is a hero, then dying right now with the devil inside him is the best outcome, because humans will only ever view him as a monster anyway. She pushes back. She asks if he's just projecting his own tragic loss and whether he'd go after the actual cultists who ruined Felix's life if she gave him their names. When he sneers and asks why he should care, she points out how absurdly unfair it is that Felix has to be sacrificed while the real villains walk away untouched. But the attacker simply refuses to listen, brushing her off by saying it's like complaining about attacks from thousands of years ago. At this point, Olympia completely loses his patience with her speeches. Coldly declaring that talking is a total waste of time, he sends thick vines shooting directly toward her. Before she can dodge, the vines wrap tightly around her body. They lift her completely helpless into the air. He stares at her suffocating frame and asks if she has any last words left to give. Even while choking, our girl stays ridiculously petty and asks if she can hit him in the head first. He ignores her quip and coldly orders her to die, tightening the hold to finish her off. But right at that breaking point, Felix's body suddenly surges back to life with terrifying force. Bursting with glowing dark energy, he shreds the vines into pieces with pure strength and catches our girl safely in his arms. She gasps out a weak thank you, relieved to be alive. But that relief vanishes the moment she senses the horrific aura pouring off him. Olympia recoils in total shock, realizing this isn't the same guy anymore. The devil inside Felix has officially taken total control of his body. With his eyes glowing a ruthless red, the possessed Felix speaks in an eerie voice. He mocks how glorious it feels for a devil to run wild once again. Without giving the attacker a second to react, Felix unleashes a massive slash of dark red demonic magic that tears through the air. The blast hits Olympia head-on, throwing him straight across the field and slamming him into the distant mountain with a massive explosion. He's battered, bleeding, and groaning in utter agony. The attacker lies crushed in the dusty crater. His eyes are turning blue from shock at the sheer gap in power. Dust clouds and shattered rocks fill the air as the chaotic magic finally settles down. Standing calmly amid the clearing smoke, Felix looks down at our girl. His eyes slowly fade back to their original calm blue tone. Our girl looks up at him with a mix of relief and total uncertainty, softly whispering his name to see if her friend is truly back. Right after the ruins come crashing down, Irene picks herself up from the rubble and locks eyes with a guy standing nearby. At first glance, she completely mistakes him for Felix, but she quickly realizes this isn't Felix at all. It's Larace. Reaching out toward her, Larace announces that he's finally meeting her in person and intensely adds that his heart aches just looking at her. Naturally, Irene is left completely baffled. Before she can process anything, Larace holds her close. He emotionally begs her to stop hurting him and demands she stop smiling so much. Snapping right back to the rocky ruins, a thoroughly confused Irene asks what he's talking about. Flustered by his own slip-up, Larace shoves her away. He mutters about how demanding she is. Irene angrily demands an explanation. But Larace shifts gears, mockingly pointing out how short she is in real life. That insult sets her off, but her rage instantly turns into frantic panic over Felix. She starts shaking Larace aggressively, demanding to know if he swallowed all of Felix's souls. Larace sharply tells her to stop touching him, clarifying that Felix merely fainted. Refusing to back down, Irene grabs him by the collar. This forces Larace to nervously admit his true form hasn't emerged like this before, because he made a light deal using Felix's body. Hearing about a deal makes Irene scream in utter disbelief. Larace defensively notes how differently she treats him compared to Felix. But Irene retorts that because it's Felix's body, she knows he's safe inside. Tearful and overwhelmed, she demands he confess what deal was made. Larace insists devil transactions are confidential. But seeing her crying face makes him clutch his chest in physical pain, complaining that her expression makes his heart hurt. Irene labels it remorse of conscience, which enrages Larace. Denying that a devil has any conscience, he becomes surrounded by a threatening dark aura. He sternly warns her that people like her die when he lifts a single finger. Moving onto a forest path, Larace briefly grabs Irene's jaw before his tone unexpectedly softens into something surprisingly gentle. As they walk together along the trail, he continues to complain about how much he utterly hates being stuck inside Felix's body. Wanting to understand what happened during the soul transfer, Irene asks if anything special occurred. Larace breaks down the situation, clarifying that Felix only received a large portion of his soul after gradually taking it in piece by piece. When Irene asks how large that portion was, Larace reveals it was 1/4 of his total soul. Seeing Irene break down in tears again out of sheer panic for Felix, Larace attentively tells her not to cry. He reassures her that Felix won't die from losing that much. At this point, I don't even blame her for being a nervous wreck. Suddenly, Claudia's voice calls out from down the path. Hearing the shout, Irene joyfully calls out to her brother before spotting Claudia right ahead. The two friends rush toward each other, and Claudia ecstatically hugs Irene in a sunny clearing, both of them pouring out immense joy and relief that the other is safe. As the group walks along the trail together, Claudia curiously asks why Irene is wearing a strange white toga dress. Irene explains that chaos broke out, pointing out that their surroundings collapsed out of nowhere. She reveals that everything they saw on the island was a fake illusion, and this ruined forest landscape is what the island truly looks like. Claudia nods along, barely managing to process the truth behind the illusion's collapse. Arriving at another forest clearing, Claudia cheerfully announces that it's finally time to sign a contract with the spirit. Irene reacts with total shock and confusion, asking if they just finished defeating the spirit. Claudia tilts her head in curiosity and presents a small treasure chest, revealing that the spirit's heart is located right inside. Puzzled by the sight, Irene asks if spirits actually have physical bodies. This prompts Larace to clarify that spirits require a body if they choose to give up the natural world. Irene ponders whether having a physical body is simply the ultimate price of freedom. Seeing an opportunity to stir up trouble, Larace sinisterly suggests that if they threaten to stab the spirit's heart, the creature will crawl out on its own. Claudia silently stares back at him with a dead serious expression, asking who he thinks he's talking about. Shortly after, as the treasure chest opens to expose a glowing red crystal heart, the heavy atmosphere shifts into something far deeper. The scene immediately transitions into a dark void representing Claudia's inner mindscape. Standing beneath a lone spotlight, Claudia experiences intense internal anguish. She angrily questions if she's gone completely crazy for even considering a contract with the spirit that brought sheer ruin to her brother. As vivid memories of Irene and her brother flash uncontrollably around her, Claudia's fury intensifies. She reflects that thinking about what the spirit did to them makes her angry enough to burn the heart immediately. However, as her dark surroundings transform into a starry void and ultimately a radiant realm featuring a glowing white wing background, Claudia's resolve completely hardens. She recognizes that despite everything, the spirit must have had its own circumstances that need to be properly checked. Overcoming her immense anger, Claudia holds the treasure chest close and resolves with absolute determination. She declares that she will personally be the one to choose the spirit she contracts with. Deep inside the ancient ruins, Olympia sits quietly among the stone pillars. He's completely caught off guard when a voice suddenly breaks the silence. Claudia casually strolls right up to him with a cheeky smile, holding a wooden chest. She doesn't hesitate to poke the bear either. She teases that he looks an awful lot like the spirit who almost stole her brother's soul earlier. That immediately sets him off. Furious, Olympia demands to know if she showed up for revenge. But she just plays it cool, teasingly asking how he figured that out. Holding up the chest, she asks if he lost it. That drives him into a total frenzy. He flares up with dark magic and lunges at her. But our girl easily dodges, completely unfazed. She asks if he's curious how she got her hands on it. He glares back, warning her not to speak that person's name. That's when she reveals her secret weapon, a glowing gemstone pendant. Olympia's jaw drops in shock as his eyes narrow, asking how she could have it. With complete confidence, she announces that she's his new master now. Now that's some entrance. She offers him a deal, suggesting they leave this island together. Olympia is skeptical, but she points out the massive explosions near the tomb. She asks if those traps were his doing. As they walk together, she offers to help him get revenge. He claims he can handle it himself. But she reminds him that after being stuck on this island for so long, he has no idea how the world has changed. That's when the mood takes a heavy hit. Olympia turns away sadly and drops a painful truth. If he leaves, the entire island will sink. Turns out, he's the only reason this place hasn't sunk over the last 4,000 years. He tells her how he created a fake copy of a woman named Arista, only for her to vanish. That leaves him wondering if she even knew he existed. Surrounded by floating petals in his mind, Claudia comforts him. She reminds him that life requires a real line between living and dying. A fake flower can never truly bloom. Tears fall from Olympia's eyes as she gently touches his face. She tells him that even if things turn to ashes, he has to learn when to let go. And just like that, the waters swell up around the ruins, and the entire island completely sinks beneath the waves. Out on the open ocean, the ship rocks quietly as the island vanishes under the sea. Olympia rests nearby after finally letting go of his past. Our girl stands by the railing alongside Larace. He notes that Olympia didn't want to watch his home sink, but then she ruins the moment by sternly reminding her that once her potion wears off, she needs to go straight to sleep. Naturally, that bossy tone rubs Claudia completely the wrong way. Flaunting a dark aura of her own, she makes it clear that just because he's a devil doesn't mean he can control her. She warns him that he completely misunderstands the situation. Feeling how tense the vibe has gotten, she heads down toward the cabin, muttering that she'd much rather deal with her real brother next time. Inside the cabin, Larace opens the door only to get completely blindsided by Irene. She comes sprinting forward wearing dog ears, screaming for Felix. But the exact second Larace coldly tells her he isn't Felix, her excitement instantly turns into a deadpan glare. The sudden reality hits her and breaks her down. And she starts dramatically crying, grabbing onto his clothes and complaining about how horribly everyone treats her. Larace just calmly agrees, making her sob harder. She calls him a two-faced demon like Janice and claims she'll die without Felix around. Larace dryly asks how Felix will feel if he remembers this breakdown, which immediately sparks pure panic. Furious that he might actually remember, she asks him if he wants to be punched. Then he calls her two-faced and she tries to storm out. But Larace casually grabs her hood, leaving her dangling hilariously off her feet. She glares up, asking if he's trying to rip her clothes. This completely flusters him. Turning bright red, Larace instantly drops her onto the floor with a loud thump. He stammers that her brother will wake up soon anyway. Sitting on the floor, she realizes he isn't quite the terrifying Larace she assumed. Crossing his arms, he explains that since he's separated, he doesn't consider himself the original. So she can just view him as another Larace. Rather than dealing with a complicated explanation, she just gives him a warm smile, fixes her outfit, and decides that name is way too inconvenient. She instantly gives him the cute nickname Larry instead. That's a major downgrade from a scary devil name. Hearing her call him that strangely hits him. He mutters Larry under his breath, but suddenly, dark smoke swirls around him as a heavy tightness grips his chest. Turns out, because he swallowed a quarter of Felix's soul, he's actually starting to be affected by all the deep affection Felix has for Irene. As she peeks over his shoulder, completely unaware, his face turns bright red, and his heart starts pounding like crazy. Felix slowly wakes up. Irene, who is seated beside him, lightens up and calls out his name. Softly, he tells her he wants to go to the sea. And she agrees. Our girl is seen walking by the shore. Sure, everything technically turned out okay in the end, but she can't bring herself to feel genuinely happy. The island she spent so much money buying ended up completely submerged in the ocean. Every single person she hired turned out to be totally useless. And worst of all, she came way too close to losing Felix forever. An absolute disaster of a vacation, ain't it? So when they actually make it to the coast at sunset, Irene's left reflecting on just how dangerously she underestimated Megapie and how brutal making a spirit contract really was. The only real silver lining in this whole mess is that nobody actually died. As they stroll along the beach, Felix looks over at Irene with a soft smirk and asks what she thinks of the ocean. He mentions that the southern waters here are known as the mermaid's tears. He admits he can see why people call it that because the view really is something special. But Irene's mind is somewhere else entirely. She mentions that Claudia finally made a contract with a spirit. She's replaying her conversation with the spirit of life, where she begged to know if he had the power to purify magic, only to get shot down with the cold reality that magic purification is completely impossible unless a literal angel or god steps in. Refusing to give up on him, Irene turns to Felix with dead seriousness. She points out that the devil inside him is special, because even though he acts like a monster, she constantly sees his real human side showing through. Felix just stares down, full of melancholy. He admits his deep fear that over time, he and the devil are eventually going to assimilate into the same creature. That thought terrifies Irene so much that she instantly shuts him down. She shouts at him that he and the devil are two completely separate beings. To break the heavy tension, Felix suddenly asks if she wants to go into the ocean itself. Irene's caught completely off guard, reminding him that she can't even swim. But Felix just reassures her that they won't go deep and tells her to hold on tight. Before she can even process what he's doing, he scoops her right up, leaving her gasping in pure shock. Wading out into the shallow golden water, Felix is suddenly overcome with heavy regret. He mutters that selling his soul to the devil was easily the worst choice he ever made. Irene instantly protests, reminding him that he didn't even have a choice. But Felix just looks down at her with a tragic mix of resignation and affection. He admits that if he had just died back then, at least he wouldn't be putting her in danger. That comment hurts her deep down, so she wraps her arms tightly around his neck. She stares straight into his eyes, desperately asking if he's planning to leave her right now and if going to hell is really okay with him. Felix confesses that he thought he could endure the suffering on his own. But he just couldn't stomach letting her see his hell. Irene refuses to let him push her away, reminding him that he promised to be responsible for her. But Felix just turns his head away, whispering that he was never qualified in the first place. Our girl isn't having any of it, though. She looks him in the eye and firmly tells him that she isn't letting him go. Touched by her fierce courage, Felix murmurs about how bold she is before pulling her into a passionate kiss right there in the glowing sea. Irene gasps in surprise, her eyes widening before she melts into the embrace. Out of nowhere, Irene suddenly breaks the kiss. She pulls away so fast that Felix is left completely flustered and breathlessly begging him to wait a second. But when Felix looks at her, his eyes are filled with tears and painful emotion. He softly asks if she's in pain or if she's terrified of him. Irene desperately tries to explain that that isn't what she meant at all. Still, Felix cold shoulders her completely. He bitterly remarks that she acted so bold earlier that he actually believed she didn't have a single fear in her heart. Before she can fix the misunderstanding, Felix stands up in the shallow ocean and steps back. He orders her in an ice-cold tone not to follow him. He warns her that if she grabs hold of him again, he'll show her what it really means to take things all the way to the end. The harsh reality of his situation lingers as they hit rock bottom. Instead of staying by her side, Felix turns around and walks further out into the deep sunset ocean. He abandons her right there. Left sitting all alone in the wet ocean water, Irene can only watch his retreat in sheer desperation. She cries out into the wind, asking if he's really just going to leave without giving her a chance to speak, and she wonders in total heartbreak if he's truly gone for good. Felix looks back on his memories, reflecting deeply on the moment he first met Irene. He remembers holding an ornate book in a quiet study room when Lady Irene Amber suddenly begged him not to tell anyone what she said. She urged him to build up his magic resistance. Hearing the word magic after so long caught him completely off guard, but what really got him was seeing her up close for the first time. She looked so stiff and tense around him, holding her breath with her mouth slightly open. This made him wonder if he looked scary to her. Realizing the effect he was having made him flinch on the spot. Because of that, he adjusted his behavior immediately. He addressed her politely as Lady Amber. He sincerely thanked her for pointing out his flaws, acknowledging that learning is never really enough. To his observant eyes, her cautious gaze made her look like a timid stray cat. She was a wary creature. He felt an earnest desire to treat with gentle care so he wouldn't startle her. Sitting back on the sofa in the lounge, he resolved right then and there that he needed to be as kind to Lady Amber as humanly possible. That dedicated approach of kindness gets put to the test during a weekend visit to the mansion sitting room. Irene arrives expecting to hang out with Claudia, only to be welcomed by the young master. He lets her know that Claudia had to step out to take care of business. Feeling embarrassed and apologizing for not calling in advance, Irene turns to leave, but Felix gently invites her to stay for tea and desserts. He remarks that sharing tea would make him feel less lonely. Though her mind urges her to leave, her appetite instantly prevails. Turns out she sits right down. She enjoys the dessert tower and drinks tea with her cheeks stuffed full of pastries. Seeing her eat so enthusiastically makes him reevaluate his perception. She doesn't look like a cat anymore. Now she looks less like a cat and more like a busy squirrel. Suddenly, Claudia rushes into the room and wraps Irene in a joyful embrace. She asks if she had to wait long. Irene brightly reassures her, explaining that Claudia's brother took wonderful care of her and kept her company. Claudia gasps in shock, questioning why Irene would say such a thing and insisting he's exaggerating. But Irene playfully maintains that he was extremely sweet. Watching Irene's tail-wagging enthusiasm makes the young master ponder if she's actually like an affectionate dog. He flusteredly clears his throat on the sofa, reminding himself that she's simply Claudia's friend. Later that night, Claudia stands outside her bedroom doorway in her nightgown. She yawns as she speaks to her brother about Irene. Claudia confesses that Irene listened to her heavy stories without judgment, reassuring her that nothing was her fault. Claudia admits she wants to meet Irene every day because of those comforting words. This leads her brother to reply that she found a wonderful friend. He recognizes that Irene possesses a thoughtful nature that neither he nor their parents could provide. His admiration for Irene deepens significantly on a stormy, rainy night when a servant announces a late arrival. Drenched from the heavy downpour, Irene stands in the sitting room. She apologizes for disturbing the household at such an ungodly hour. Felix puts her at ease, assuring her that he was still awake working anyway. He offers her a warm cup of tea alongside a room to stay in the mansion. Sitting opposite her on the sofa, he notices a visible bruise on her face. Embarrassed, Irene clumsily explains that she accidentally rolled down the stairs. Refusing to leave her in discomfort, he offers to heal her injuries. Irene initially hesitates, insisting that a minor injury does not require potions, but he clarifies that he intends to use magic instead. Reaching his hand toward her with a gentle demeanor, he confesses that seeing her injured breaks his heart. He asks if she'll permit him to heal Claudia's dear friend. Irene hesitantly consents. Taking his seat right next to her on the sofa, the young master reaches out and gently places his hand against her bruised cheek. He releases a soothing wave of green healing magic that washes over her and instantly cures her injury. Shocked by how fast the magic works, Irene touches her newly restored cheek and smiles at him with radiant warmth. She expresses her immense gratitude, telling him that her body feels completely refreshed and praising his kindness. Looking directly at her joyful smile, the young master feels a sudden, violent pounding in his chest. His face flushes intensely red. He barely manages to whisper that it's a relief. Clutching his chest tightly as his heart beats frantically against his ribs, he reflects on the overwhelming emotion consuming him. He realizes that whether his intense feelings took root on that rainy night, or had been quietly growing from the very beginning, every word Irene utters and every smile she gives is so profoundly lovely. It makes him feel as though he's going completely crazy. Inside the mansion, Claudia declares with total confidence that she's going to tell everyone they're living together forever, because otherwise, they'll be forced to keep Irene at Felix's house. Hearing that sudden outburst makes Irene gasp in shock. but Felix actually pauses to think it over. He quietly laughs to himself because, as silly as it sounds, her idea actually makes sense. If those obsessive guys chasing Claudia find out what's going on, they'll target Irene in a heartbeat. Since Felix doesn't have siblings to help protect her, keeping Irene close is the safest way to guard her smile. He finds himself thinking back to when Irene first arrived, remembering how hard she worked to learn everything just to avoid making him uncomfortable. He still remembers her little preferences, like how she favored grapefruit tarts over macarons and didn't care for sweet candies. You've gotta love how much attention he pays to the little things. Watching her every day had become the ultimate joy of his life. Everything she said sounded so sweet, and whenever she spoke directly to him, his heart raced like crazy. Looking into her golden orange eyes unlocked a deep greed inside him, making him realize that watching her from afar wasn't enough anymore. What started as a gentle drizzle had grown into a massive wave that completely swallowed him up. He still vividly remembers her making that playful yet earnest promise, telling him that if he ever turned into a demon, she'd follow him all the way to hell just to stay by his side. Unfortunately for him, that warm memory completely vanishes as Felix suddenly wakes up lost inside a dark mental space. He's lying there confused, knowing full well he's not the type of guy to faint out of nowhere. Turns out, this whole blackout is happening because of the dark power lingering inside his own body. Out of nowhere, the devil himself manifests right from a swirl of dark magic, taunting Felix with a cruel smirk and asks if he's unhappy with his appearance. But then he drops a massive bombshell. While Felix is stuck unconscious in this void, the girl he loves is hovering right on the edge of death. That terrible truth hits Felix like a truck. Despite every effort to protect Irene, all he's really done is drag her deeper into his own personal hell. Sensing his absolute panic, the devil offers to wake him up, initially demanding 1/5 of his soul. He mocks Felix as a total loser who can't win on his own anymore, now that he can't use his magic or control his demonic power. Stressed and completely furious, Felix cuts through the taunts and demands the devil get straight to the point. Realizing how desperate Felix is to save her, the devil raises his price, offering to take over Felix's body, handle everything, and save Irene. But in exchange for 1/4 of his soul, driven by sheer desperation to keep Irene alive, Felix surrenders to the Dark Pact, agreeing to the terms and orders the devil to wake him up immediately. The devil grins victoriously as a magic circle flashes on the floor, warning him that this process is going to hurt. Corrupted dark tendrils surge forward, tightly wrapping around Felix's face and binding his body. As the seal activates, vital pieces of his soul and humanity get violently torn away. The dark corruption invades his mind, replacing his gentle nature with severe malice toward anyone threatening them, especially that sinister blonde nobleman and his dark-haired ally. Felix bitterly reflects that a peaceful rest is way too lenient for his enemies. He wants to pretend to give them a taste of heaven just to throw them repeatedly into the pits of hell. Human virtue and the sanctity of life completely dissolve from his thoughts. As his dark heart burns, Felix realizes with cold numbness that he can no longer remember what once made him smile, cry, or feel anger. At this point, the only thing remaining inside his hollow soul is lingering embers of love and desire for Irene. But that's when the horrifying truth settles in. By submitting to the devil's corrupt influence, he's practically guaranteed to end up hurting Irene with his own hands, the one thing he swore he would never do. Visions of Irene, smiling radiantly among floating petals, flash through his mind, while his dark silhouette twists in agony under corruption. To stop his corrupted self from inflicting harm upon the person he cherishes most, Felix reaches a painful resolution. Falling through shimmering water and sky, he accepts that he has to run away. By distancing himself and disappearing into the deep waters, he can fulfill his final vow to keep Irene completely safe from his own dark path. Inside the coastal mansion, Claudia waits on edge until the door suddenly swings open, revealing Irene walking in, soaking wet. She looks completely defeated, with cold rainwater dripping down her face as she shivers inside her cloak. Seeing her friend in such terrible shape, Claudia doesn't hesitate for a second. She rushes forward, throwing a cloak around Irene's freezing shoulders while frantically asking what happened out on the shore. She wonders if Irene ran into her brother, or if she somehow took a terrible fall on her way back. But Irene doesn't say a word. She just stands there frozen, staring into space with total silence. That silence terrifies Claudia. She tries checking up on her again, warning her she'll catch a cold. But when she looks closer at Irene's face, her whole mood changes. Irene is softly crying, with tears mixing into the rain on her cheeks. Claudia's heart breaks as she gently asks why she's crying. Irene chokes up, barely whispering Claudia's name before the brutal truth drops. She confirms that Felix is gone, leaving them behind, and he's likely never coming back. That single confession completely crushes whatever hope they had left, leaving them to deal with the crushing reality that Felix might really be gone for good. Meanwhile, over at the Imperial Palace, the entire power balance of the Empire completely shifts. Emperor Venice the 32nd has finally passed away after a long illness, leaving the throne wide open. Stepping up to take his place is Lucas, officially crowned as the 33rd Emperor. Lucas sits on his grand throne, oozing arrogant energy as he looks down at Benjamin. Benjamin casually smirks up at him, asking how His Majesty feels about taking the throne. Lucas scowls down, mocking him for suddenly pretending to care about manners. But the guard smoothly fires back that he's genuinely congratulating him from his heart because this outcome was totally obvious. Lucas casually brushes it off, acting like taking the crown isn't even a big deal since it'd be weird if the position belonged to anyone else anyway. Seeing how relaxed Lucas is, Benjamin casually remarks that he is absolutely right, but Lucas's tone turns dark really fast. He straight up warns the other guy that if anyone else ever tries sitting in his seat, he'd personally execute them on the spot. He playfully teases Lucas about sounding cruel, asking how he could ever get the Emperor to trust him. Lucas coldly tells him just to know his place. He smoothly agrees to obey, casually pointing out he has zero interest in taking the throne anyway. Just as they finish their shady little chat, the heavy double doors of the throne room suddenly creak open wide. Constantine comes bursting through the entrance, gasping for breath as he desperately tries to catch his wind. Lucas instantly scowls at him, furious that someone would dare interrupt him on his coronation day. Constantine quickly bows to apologize for his terrible timing, but he insists manners don't even matter right now because Claudia has finally returned. The moment Lucas hears her name, his eyes light up with unhinged excitement. He instantly assumes the absolute best, asking if Claudia finally abandoned Amber and came crawling back to him. Constantine tries to set the record straight, telling him Lady Irene is right there with her, but Lucas doesn't even let him finish. He cuts him off mid-sentence, declaring Amber doesn't matter at all as long as Claudia comes back to his side. Seeing the Emperor get carried away by his own delusion, Benjamin has to jump in and tell Lucas to actually shut up and listen to what Constantine is trying to say. Realizing there's more to the story, Lucas sighs and permits him to keep talking. That's when Constantine drops the massive news. Claudia and Irene didn't come back alone. Turns out they hired a union to reach the island, and they brought the Great Spirit back with them. Lucas freezes, caught off guard. But Constantine makes it sound even crazier, explaining that this isn't just some high-tier spirit walking through the city streets alongside the girls, it's very likely the actual king of all spirits himself. That news lands like a total bomb in the throne room, leaving Lucas completely silent as he processes what this actually means. He remembers Claudia mentioning before how difficult it was to form spirit contracts, so he figures she must have pulled off some crazy trick to do it. Over on the couch, Benjamin wears a malicious smirk, openly praising Irene for setting things up so well. He points out that with a spirit of that level by her side, it's really just a matter of time before Claudia gains massive respect and leaves a huge mark on history. But hearing how powerful Claudia is about to become only makes Lucas's possessive obsession flare up to a breaking point. He fiercely grips the armrest of his throne, his hands shaking with greed as he looks down at the carpet. He stubbornly refuses to accept that she's out of his reach, convincing himself that even if it's not right now, Claudia is guaranteed to belong to him eventually. He figures there's still plenty of time for him to play his cards, but to completely own her, he needs to raise his own status to an even higher level than just Emperor. Fueled by absolute possessiveness, Lucas makes his final move, declaring to the entire room that it's time to launch a massive war of conquest to take over everything. It's been 3.5 years since Felix packed up and left. That long stretch of time hangs heavy over the ocean coastline where he once stood. Late into the night, Irene is still locked away in her research room. She is surviving on pure stimulants just to stay awake as she writes at her desk. Claudia notices light creeping under the door and steps inside. She calls Irene out for working at such crazy hours. Irene laughs it off and turns the tables, pointing out that Claudia is awake too. She admits living on caffeine and potion fumes will definitely shorten her lifespan eventually. When Claudia asks to review her work, it makes her reflect on how much their world has shifted over these 3.5 years. Lucas is now emperor, with Benjamin and Constantine serving as his aides. The separate religions of the nobility and imperial family have merged into one single force. On top of that, Claudia has risen straight to the top. Irene can now manufacture virtually any potion imaginable. That's really a massive power upgrade. But while checking the desk, Claudia compliments some artwork Irene drew. This sends Irene into a panic as she frantically denies having any artistic talent at all. That brief levity vanishes quickly when Claudia brings the mood right back down. She soberly reminds Irene that they've come way too far to back down now. Because nobody is willing to yield, this entire battle will only end when someone ends up dead. Knowing full well what's at stake, Irene turns right back to her alchemy. She carefully drips a final key component from a glass flask into a beaker. The moment the drop hits, she gets super excited. She declares that adding this last piece finally completes the potion. Unfortunately for her, magic rarely plays nice when you rush it. Before they can celebrate, the magical liquid bubbles uncontrollably and flashes bright light. Irene frantically screams for Claudia to take cover, but a catastrophic explosion detonates right inside the lab before they can react. When the smoke clears, both of them are standing there covered in black soot. Claudia's long hair is blown out into a dizzying afro. Exhausted and totally drained, Claudia asks if they can finally call it a night and rest. Irene couldn't agree more. This is just hilarious. But rest doesn't last long around here. Walking through the palace corridor shortly afterward, they get approached by a stylish blonde guy holding a walking cane. He hands over an invitation envelope stamped with a red seal. He insists Irene attend an upcoming victory party. A bit bewildered, Irene asks where this sudden invite comes from and why she has to go. This prompts him to explain that the party honors a legendary war hero who's about to receive the title of Duke of the Kingdom of Rixa. When Irene questions why any of that requires her presence, the blonde guy insists there's someone present who needs attention. He describes this war hero as an orphan with a spotless record and zero backing, who single-handedly led every war to victory without losing once. Because of that insane track record, he suggests this hero might be exactly the person they need for their bigger plan. When Irene raises concerns about potential side effects, he stays firm. He reminds her that they're missing the final puzzle piece and this hero is it. That's when he bluntly instructs Irene to seduce him. He cites her natural talent for attracting people. Irene is utterly shocked and annoyed. She demands if the hero is a woman and flatly refuses the task. She argues that seduction isn't her job and reminds him that he drew her into this mess in the first place. A purple-haired woman nearby watches in surprise. Realizing our girl isn't going to play along, the blonde guy clarifies that he doesn't plan to involve the hero thoughtlessly. He relies on Irene's sharp eye for judging people to observe the man and make a proper assessment. Irene silently yields. But the thought of a hero instantly brings back memories of Felix. Resigned to her assignment, Irene sighs and accepts that she must evaluate him. Meanwhile, over in the Imperial audience room, Emperor Lucas sits wearing his crown alongside Benjamin. They are discussing the war hero's official report. Holding the documents, Lucas displays a smirk. He sarcastically asks who hired the scribe as a novelist. Benjamin adds that the heavy rhetoric makes it hard to trust. Lucas defends the warrior, noting that sending him to the battlefield consistently yields victory every single time. Benjamin agrees on the facts, admitting that this dual sword wielder is a unique figure who emerges victorious in every battle. Though he remarks that a gem this beautiful is too good to be used merely as a hunting dog, Lucas questions why Benjamin can't hide his creepy facial expression. And honestly, the Emperor isn't wrong. The war hero is a terrifying force, a ruthless killer whose twin swords pierce armor and carve through flesh. He leaves behind mountains of dead bodies like a god of war descending to earth. Behind his words, Lucas harbors a cold strategy. By playing the merciful savior to a hero who has nothing, he plans to maneuver things so Claudia eventually rolls directly into his arms. Our story kicks off in a local tavern where a friendly bartender slides a complimentary drink over to Irene. He calls the cocktail Hair of the Dog, explaining that just like rubbing a dog's fur on a bite wound, a little alcohol is the ultimate cure for emotional heartbreak. He thinks it suits her situation perfectly, encouraging her to drop by more often to bring some comfort to Martina, a woman who's been through her fair share of pain. Irene can't help but tease him about his obvious crush, promising to root for him from the background quietly. Right on cue, the flustered bartender tries to deny everything just as Martina steps into the private room. It's been nearly 6 months since they last saw each other, and Irene immediately apologizes for taking so long. She explains that ever since she lost her psychic powers, finding Martina without proper intel became practically impossible. But Martina isn't bothered at all. She gently pats Irene's head, reassuring her that none of that matters and reminding her she's always welcome. On top of that, Martina wants to return the favor for the massive fortune Irene helped her make in the past, so she hands over some crucial information. As Irene takes the mysterious files, she realizes just how blind she is now. Because the story completely strayed from its original timeline months ago, she no longer has any idea what major trends are playing out behind the scenes. Later that night in her room, Irene dives straight into the documents to see what she's dealing with. The dossier focuses on a brutal mercenary named Walter, detailing a terrifying list of titles like the Mercenary of Judgment, the Swordmaster, and the Blue-Eyed Devil. Irene finds it odd that someone without a holy background would ever carry a title like Judgment, but the terrifying details don't stop there. The reports describe Walter as an orphan, with 0 official records who seems completely immune to physical temptations, having never set foot in a brothel despite spending endless months on the battlefield. Success has clearly blinded him, turning him into a cold-blooded killer who revels in bloody massacres. Yet at the same time, the claims about him being a total loner don't quite add up. Irene gets more and more puzzled by how contradictory his actual personality seems, especially with whispers that he only snapped into a murderer after subduing his enemies. Realizing these disturbing reports are only raising more questions than answers, she decides to toss the unsettling files aside and head for her closet. It's time to pick out an elegant dress and get ready for the upcoming victory party, whether she feels ready or not. When the day of the party arrives, Irene takes a stroll through the palace gardens to soak in the fresh spring air. That's when her younger brother Liam comes walking up to greet her. Seeing how much he's grown lately, Irene jokingly asks if he can spare a few inches of his height. But her playful mood quickly shifts when she spots the heavy dark circles under his eyes. Liam sheepishly admits he pulled an all-nighter, apologizing for dragging her along to escort her. Irene soft-heartedly brushes it off, promising him that her own exhaustion is just the price of overworking herself. As the two siblings make their way toward the grand ballroom, Liam asks why she requested his escort instead of the Lady Chamberlain. Irene explains that Claudia was completely overwhelmed with work. Hearing that, Liam mentions he noticed how stressed Claudia looked, and really wanted her to get out for fresh air. making him super grateful that Irene accepted his offer instead. But as they get closer to the entrance, Liam's focus completely pivots to the infamous hero. He gets so intensely hyped up about seeing this notorious bloodthirsty slaughterer in person that he starts rambling without taking a breath. Speech bubbles practically bury his face as he gushes about the mysterious war legend, leaving Irene chuckling to herself at his sheer fanboy energy. Stepping into the glittering ballroom, the siblings are met by Lady Depilation, who completely validates Liam's hype. She admits she's dying to see the hero too, bringing up wild rumors that his striking features look like a divine god dropped straight from the heavens, making people overlook his violent streak. She begins guessing that his late arrival means he's already plotting his next war campaign, doubting a bloodthirsty killer would care about high society parties anyway. Another snobby, noble lady chiming in snidely suggests his commoner roots are probably keeping him from fitting in. Irene can only manage an awkward smile, internally noting how brutal noble gossip can be. But before the conversation can spiral any further, the massive palace doors creak wide open as an official announcement echoes across the room, declaring Hero Walter's arrival. Walking in under a heavy, suffocating dark pressure, the warrior steps forward with a bare, scarred chest and messy dark hair framing his battle-tested face. The entire crowd gasps in absolute shock at his terrifying presence. But when Irene looks up, her eyes widen in pure disbelief. Standing right in front of the entire aristocracy isn't some random stranger at all. She softly whispers out the name, Felix? Our girl freezes up, looking completely thrown off. Now that's some crazy twist. Our girl is lying flat on the bed in complete exhaustion, totally overwhelmed by everything that just went down. Her brother stands over her in pure frustration, completely fed up with her bizarre behavior. He actually has to yell at her twice just to get her attention. She sits up startled and confused, but he doesn't give her a second to breathe. He immediately starts grilling her about the hero, pointing out that despite the heavy tension between them, neither of them said a single word to each other. On top of that, she's been completely out of it ever since she laid eyes on him. She hastily tries to deny knowing the hero, but her brother isn't buying her weak excuses for a second. Realizing she's stubborn and completely closing herself off, her brother decides to call it a night and retreat to his own assigned room. He tells her to reach out if something is genuinely wrong, then turns toward the exit. As soon as he steps out and closes the door behind him, she watches him go before sinking back down onto the floor with a heavy, troubled sigh. Alone in the quiet room, she stares up at the ceiling, clutching a blue gemstone pendant hanging around her neck while her mind spirals into chaos. She just can't bring herself to accept the terrible claims surrounding the hero. How could anyone change so drastically in just 3.5 short years? It doesn't make any sense to her that a man who used to value human life above everything else is now feared as a ruthless killer who slaughtered thousands. She wonders if dark magic or some sinister power from the devil is at play here. In her mind, she remembers him as a gentle, silver-haired guy with glasses who smiled so warmly. But no matter how much she tries to deny reality, she can't erase the image of the dark-haired warrior with the cheek scar and bright blue eyes. Those intense blue eyes undeniably belong to Felix. That's when the truth hits her like a ton of bricks. Felix left years ago to protect her, and now he's returned for that same reason. Meanwhile, outside on the Grand Palace grounds, a huge victory party kicks off that's set to last over 3 full days. Once all the wild festivities wind down, the Emperor plans to officially grant Walter a noble title, a castle, and his own territory. From there, Walter is destined to set out one final time in this long war, where he'll ultimately be bound to work directly under Lucas. Now, to understand how she ended up sprawled on the floor like this, we have to look back at what happened in the Grand Party Hall earlier. Driven by her gut feeling that Walter and Felix are the same person, believing it 10,000 times over despite having zero concrete physical proof, she decided the best way to handle her stress was aggressively chugging glass after glass of champagne. Unsurprisingly, she drank way past her limits. Her worried brother found her stumbling and leaning drunkenly against him, begging her to stop before she completely ruined herself. When he asked her just how much she'd consumed, she offered a silly, giggling lie about only having 3 drinks. Her brother was completely exasperated. He questioned why she was knocking back so much alcohol when her tolerance has always been notoriously weak. Naturally, our girl boastfully claimed that she's grown up now and isn't her former self anymore. Realizing she was completely wasted, her exhausted brother hauled her up onto his back and carried her all the way through the hall back to her bedroom. When he dropped her heavily onto her bed, she happily mumbled that the soft mattress felt like absolute heaven. Her brother, pushed way past his limit, screamed right back that carrying her was pure hell for him before wishing her a bad night and storming out of the room. Which brings us right back to the present. Lying alone on the bed, our girl is suddenly hit by an agonizing, sharp pain in her chest, almost like a blade is stabbing straight into her heart. Gasping for air, she clutches her chest and gazes down at the blue crystal pendant in her hand. A vivid memory instantly resurfaces of the gentle Felix handing her that exact blue jewel, promising that breaking it would immediately alert him to her exact location. He solemnly urged her to use it whenever she found herself in real danger, confessing that he could never forgive himself if anything terrible happened to her. Looking at the crystal with heavy doubt and sorrow, she wondered if its magic even functions after all this time. She gives a bitter little chuckle and drops the blue crystal onto the floor, where it shatters into a spray of sparkling pieces. Expecting absolutely nothing to happen, she lets out a sad laugh. But right on cue, the balcony curtains are blown wildly inward by a powerful gust of wind. Surprised, she turns toward the window just as Felix, with his shirt unbuttoned and his bright blue eyes burning with intensity, leaps straight through the open balcony window right into her room. Late at night, out on the palace terrace garden, our guy Felix suddenly sweeps in and pulls our girl into a tight embrace. Irene whispers that she finally caught him. But instead of letting her soak in the moment, they retreat into the quiet garden woods where things get emotional fast. Our girl is practically in tears, desperate to get through to him. She lets him know that ever since he walked away, she's been chasing after him every single step of the way. Sure, she got lost a few times and had to rest when her body couldn't handle it. But she never gave up until she caught up. Looking right into his eyes, she begs him not to go if leaving is truly that painful. Silence heavy enough to suffocate fills the air while Felix stands completely frozen. Reaching up to touch his face, she notices she now reaches right up to his eyes. She realizes his voice, his breathing, and his gaze match Mr. Angel's completely. But the moment she calls him Felix, he pushes her hand away. He sharply orders her to go inside and warns her never to call him by that name again, putting up a wall between them. Naturally, our girl isn't about to back down. She directly confronts him, asking if he's completely sick of her or if he actually hates her now. Felix tries to protect himself by giving her a cold lie, claiming that yeah, he really does. But that lie backfires instantly because she sees right through him. Grabbing his face and holding on tightly, she cries out that he's lying. She swears she won't let go until the day she collapses. Desperate to keep his distance, Felix steps back and shoves her off, telling her sternly to cut it out. Hurt to her core, she asks if he really plans on keeping this up and hurting her. When he insists he isn't lying, she calls his bluff, asserting that he actually likes her. He denies it, so she shouts that he loves her. Unable to look at her, Felix turns away and claims he forgot those feelings. But our girl turns his logic right back on him, shouting that forgetting those feelings proves he loved her in the first place. She warns him that if he pushes her away, she'll kiss him right then and there. Panicking, he begs her to stop, insisting he can't go back. Instead of backing off, she hugs him from behind, taking his hand in hers. She asks if pushing her away means he actually wants her to make Walter fall in love with her instead. Gazing earnestly into his eyes, she promises she can't help loving him. She swears she'll do better and give her soul to him if he just stays by her side. Right when things reach a boiling point, Felix senses someone approaching. Our girl catches on to the disturbance too, whispering that someone is watching them. Before they get caught, Felix reacts instantly by covering her mouth with his hand and pulling her behind the dense foliage out of sight. Moments later, two noblemen walk along the terrace, completely unaware of the couple hiding in the shadows. Instead of minding their own business, the noblemen start spewing pure poison, mocking Felix and calling him a creepy, heartless murderer who completely lacks humanity. The second noble agrees, questioning why His Majesty would ever allow such a dangerous killer into the palace. He wonders who can guarantee Felix won't go crazy after taking so many lives. Hiding in the dark, Felix is forced to absorb every soul-crushing word. Honestly, these noble guys are just asking for trouble. As their voices fade, the snobbish duo keeps complaining about the king granting Felix a noble title despite him lacking talent, leaving a heavy air behind them. Seeing how deeply those cruel insults hurt him, our girl isn't about to let him sink into that darkness. In a bold move to snap him out of it, she playfully licks his palm before gently cupping his face, giving him the reassurance he needs. She tenderly tells him that those snobs are just scared to evaluate real results. She assures him that to her, he's a wonderful, lovable man who has silently protected everyone no matter what. She softly promises to whisper how lovely he is every single day. Stunned and blushing intensely, Felix stands there completely speechless. Seeing him retreat into his shell, our girl smiles with determination, demanding he promise he won't leave anymore. When he stays quiet, she warns him that since he's suddenly acting reticent, she's forced to use extreme measures to open his mouth. She gives him a strict 10-second ultimatum, warning that if he doesn't answer in time, she'll kiss him. She immediately starts her countdown out loud. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. But before she even finishes counting, she leans in and seals her promise with a romantic kiss, taking complete control of the situation. Deep in the quiet mansion garden late at night, Irene finds herself wrapped in an emotional kiss with Felix. As they hold each other tight while a quiet countdown ticks away in her mind, Felix pulls back, completely confused by everything happening between them. He genuinely can't fathom why she's acting like this, or how she managed to recognize him so easily. But for Irene, there was never any doubt. She lets him know that even if he tried walking past her without a word, there's absolutely no way she wouldn't know it was him. Hearing those words hits Felix right where it hurts. He quietly wonders how he's ever supposed to forget her now, only for Irene to offer him a bit of tender comfort, telling him that he doesn't need to try and forget her anymore. For a brief second, it feels like they might actually have a chance to figure things out. Unfortunately for him, Felix just looks back at her with complete sorrow and admits that it's already far too late for that. Before Irene can even process what that means, a nearby clock tower suddenly chimes midnight. Right on the third strike, Felix's body instantly loses all strength and collapses right in front of her. Irene's heart drops, desperately calling out his name. But the person standing back up isn't Felix at all. The moment the body pushes itself back up, he stumbles away, sniffling in total confusion. He stammers out whether she's Irene and why on earth she's standing in the garden with him. Naturally, Irene is instantly annoyed. She snaps right back, telling him she should be the one asking questions. She demands to know where Felix went, why this guy popped up out of nowhere, and why he's wiping away tears. He sniffles defensively, insisting he isn't crying. Before blurting out that midnight means it's time for their shared consciousness to switch. Because their souls have assimilated so much, they're forced to swap control every 12 hours on the dot. Hearing that sends Irene into a full-blown rage. She lunges forward, grabbing him by the collar and violently shaking him for answers. Panicked for his life, the devil Larraise is now taking over as Larry frantically begs her to calm down so he can explain. He reveals that Felix has completely lost his normal human emotions, meaning the only thing driving him right now is his feelings for her, alongside a massive hatred for those other three guys. When Irene checks if that's true, Larry swears on it, but Irene shouts that there's no way she can trust a literal devil. Driven by pure anger, Irene tightens her grip, demanding to know how much of Felix's soul he actually stole. After a tense silence, Larry nervously confesses that he took half of it, trying his best to play it off like it was just a tiny little piece. That ridiculous excuse causes Irene to explode completely, screaming at him for treating half a person's soul like it's nothing. Larry gets defensive, swearing that Felix was the one who wanted to make the deal in the first place. But Irene doesn't care about his excuses. She wants a way to fix this right now. She demands to know if there's any way for Felix to return to how he was before all this started. Larry hesitates, asking if she really wants to hear the truth. But Irene commands him to speak up since he claimed earlier that he couldn't lie to her. Reluctantly, Larry gives up the secret, revealing that if he dies and completely disappears without leaving a trace behind, Felix will finally be able to return to his original angel form. Irene listens closely, making sure that's the only requirement. Once Larry confirms it, her expression turns deadly serious. She looks him dead in the eye and asks a terrifying question. If she wants him to, will Larry be willing to die for her? Larry gasps in pure shock, completely stunned as tears start streaming down his face while using Felix's physical body. Irene looks at him, confused as to why he's blubbering using someone else's face. But Larry can only mutter through his tears that he doesn't understand what's happening, feeling human emotions for the very first time. Seeing him like this, Irene offers a cold, resolute smile. She asks if he remembers when he told her not to laugh, back when he felt so happy over the name Larry she had given him. She admits that she almost regretted giving him a name, because a name gives someone a real trace of existence in this world, and you can't really kill something that doesn't exist. Terrified, Larry begs her to stop right there, but Irene calmly tells him that she's going to have to kill him soon, so he better try his best to live while he still can. Larry desperately cries out that he wants to live too, but Irene just tells him to live for now, adding that stars always shine their brightest right before they disappear completely, hoping he shines brighter than anyone else. Larry tries to argue before totally breaking down and screaming at her to stop. Completely shattered, Larry drops straight to his knees, shaking uncontrollably while crying. Irene walks up with absolute determination, gently caressing his tear-stained face, and delivers her final vow. She's going to save Felix no matter what, so Larry needs to get ready to die. Our girl is trapped inside her castle bedroom, trying to figure out her next move. Her immediate priority is guiding Larry out of the castle, while holding off on apologizing to Liam until she gets the Felix situation under control. But keeping a literal devil hidden isn't easy. Her solution? She buries him completely beneath a mountain of plushies and teddy bears, asserting that no one will find him there. Sweating under the stuffed animals, our guy grumbles about whether devils have any dignity left, pointing out that the toys smell like her. She casually lets him know that, of course, they smell like her. She sleeps with them every night. That gets him flustered, asking if she actually sleeps with them. But before he can keep talking, she leans over him and orders him to shut his mouth. If they're caught, they'll pay with their lives. She commands him not to let out a single breath. The trapped devil mutters that this is too high a price. Sitting nearby on the bed, our girl glares at him, calling him a feelings thief while trying to figure out how to kill him without harming Felix. To make matters worse, she still plans to sneak away in a carriage, but our guy grumpily asks her to drop the subject. Our girl isn't having it, though. She asks if he can return Felix's feelings, wondering if this is his first time occupying a human body for this long and how many people he's possessed before. Turns out, this actually is his first time inhabiting a body for this long. He confesses he didn't expect their feelings to be neutralized like this. He lays it out like this. Souls are like clear water. Tampering with clear water requires mixing it with something else. But because Felix possessed an abundance of clear water, mixing in all of the devil's own water couldn't fully corrupt it. Because of that, they ended up in a neutralized state where neither side's fundamental nature actually changed. Our girl observes that as the devil of love and lust, he only reacts to love. Surprised by her knowledge, he asks how she knows, but she completely ignores his shock. She complains that Felix's innocent water is now dirty, and demands he dilute it back to normal. Unfortunately for her, he scowls and admits he doesn't know how, adding that he won't do anything without a reward. Leaning over him playfully, she asks if he'd comply if she kissed him. That sends him blushing furiously as he flatly refuses. Sitting up, our girl silently reasons that even for survival, one could live without touching a soul. She hates the thought of killing him, but believes she can endure whatever comes next. Early the next morning, an elf named Olivia arrives at the doorway. Our girl immediately asks to borrow his power, but Olivia flatly refuses. But our girl isn't done. She pulls out a glowing magical dagger from a box given by Claudia, hoping a quick threat will make him useful. Olivia states detachedly that threats won't work anymore. Realizing force won't work, she offers him a book titled 108 Ways to Win Over Claudia's Heart by Irene Amber. Enticed, Olivia reads it and asks how he can assist. But as soon as he sees the man buried under plushies, Olivia shields his eyes in shock. Our girl urges respect for hobbies, but Olivia facepalms, reminding her that she forced him into it. After apologizing, she asks Olivia to create a figure disguise for the man so he remains unrecognized when taking his title and heading to the fields. Inspecting him, Olivia asks if the man is human, and she whispers that he's half devil. Olivia notes that replicating a devil is difficult, though similarities are doable, warning that attentive observers might still notice. Reassured that no one is near, our girl praises his maturity and urges him to do his best. Olivia estimates it will take a month, but the half-devil demands it be done in half a month, and Olivia agrees. Giving a thumbs up, our girl instructs him to win the battle and return safely. Inspecting his face closely, Olivia asks for an introduction, and she reveals he's Claudia's brother. Realizing who he's dealing with, Olivia understands he has to act quietly. She makes it clear full secrecy isn't necessary, he just needs to remain quiet until she consults Fel. Olivia agrees to look the other way until Claudia returns, adding that afterward she's on her own so she can make Claudia suffer the least. With a crackle of plant magic vines wrap around Olivia, he creates a doll that looks exactly like Felix. Irene turns right around and demands that he keep his end of the promise too. Olivia quietly confirms that he made the skeleton, but lets her know the delicate work will take at least another day before stepping away. With him gone, Irene walks down the hallway, accompanied by Larry, who is holding a wooden box. Larry immediately eyes all the stuff she's carrying and asks where she's off to. Irene bluntly tells him she's heading over to talk with Felix. Naturally, Larry wants to know what she's actually planning. But Irene isn't giving him anything and coldly shuts him down, saying it's none of his business. Deep down, she's quietly wondering if she and Felix can finally have a real private talk if he sleeps. Larry just gets this terrible gut feeling about where this is going. Once they step inside the bedroom, Larry instantly loses his cool. He leans in way too close and pretty much shouts at her, asking if her big plan is to just sleep with Felix. Irene stays completely unfazed, asking if he really thinks that's her end goal and letting him know she just wants to set a decent mood to talk. But that only sends Larry off the deep end. He snaps back, asking how on earth this kind of setup creates a good mood for talking. He argues that it looks way more like she's getting ready to communicate with her body instead. Irene just shrugs it off, saying that if Felix is down for it, nothing is stopping them. Flustered, Larry stammers out how she expects to handle the devil's desires on her very first time. But our girl calls out his sudden memory loss, reminding him that he's the exact reason Felix's desires were sparked in the first place, forcing Felix to leave. Because of that, he has zero right to judge her. She asks if Felix succumbing to temptation even helps him out. This leaves Larry stuttering that it doesn't matter anymore since he already ate half of Felix's soul anyway. Irene takes that in stride, telling him, that's great, so now he can just lie down quietly while she plans things out with Felix and figures out how to tell his family. Despite her shutting him down, Larry gives her a dead serious warning that Felix is genuinely dangerous. Irene dryly asks if he's just introducing himself, but Larry insists he's not joking around. When Irene questions if it's just fake danger and says she's ready to accept it, Larry completely loses his temper. He shouts that it isn't something she can just take on a whim. He insists that enduring Felix is better than burning in hellfire, so she shouldn't care about it. Irene reminds him again that he lost his right to speak. As Larry shrinks back and begs her not to touch him, Irene presses her hand firmly against his chest with a heavy thud, pinning him right there. Talk about an absolute power move. She commands him to put his hand on his chest and actually use his conscience, forcing him to admit who made Felix's desire dangerous in the first place. Clutching his chest in genuine agony, Larry begs her to let go and distressingly admits he did it, wondering why he even acted that way. Watching him break down, Irene silently ponders whether he regrets that assimilation failed to erase his devilish nature, or if his regret stems from love for her. Larry looks up in utter distress, complaining that his heart feels like it's bursting, burning inside like hellfire. He asks what this feeling even is. Irene looks down ice cold and identifies it right away as jealousy. Larry gasps in disbelief, asking if jealousy is really this sickening urge to run away with her and devour the rest of Felix's soul. That crosses the line. Irene coldly warns him that if he tries, she'll teach him a pain worse than death. Honestly, she is not playing around anymore. Larry slumps onto the bed, totally defeated. Leaning down over him as dark rose vines wrap around the bed frame, Irene tells him it's time to take responsibility for their choices. Internally, she admits that because she failed to catch Felix, she caused him to turn out this way, so she'll endure whatever pain Felix inflicts. Larry asks why she'd do that. Irene explains she loves Felix, meaning Larry must endure the pain or pleasure alongside her since he took the Felix she loved. Broken. Larry asks why it has to be him. Irene softly replies it's because he loves her. Asked if he's ready to take responsibility, Larry hides under the covers among the rose vines, admitting he feels like he's in hell and completely miserable. Our girl is standing over Felix while he's fast asleep, completely overwhelmed with anxiety. She misses him terribly, anxiously waiting for him to wake up while trying to figure out how to lighten her mood. Before long, her chest feels like it's about to explode from the tension. Realizing she has no options left, she turns to her absolute last resort, grabbing a bottle of alcohol and chugging the entire thing down. The liquid hits her instantly, making her stumble back with a soft groan as it takes effect. Right around then, Felix opens his eyes, sits up, and looks totally serious. Our girl panics a bit, sitting beside him and stammering out a question about what they should do now, admitting she thought everything was just a dream. But Felix doesn't sugarcoat it. He plainly tells her it definitely wasn't a dream. Touching his face with a wince, he complains about how much his eyes hurt and wonders aloud if the devil ever cries. That makes her stop and reflect on her actions. She gently suggests his pain might be her fault, explaining that the demon seemed to have hijacked his feelings, which made her reject him in such a harsh way. Hearing that hits Felix hard, leaving him to quietly mutter to himself about what it actually feels like to be loved. As their conversation deepens, tears start trailing down Felix's face. He admits it took his whole existence to learn how to feel everything, except love. Seeing this, our girl realizes that despite everything, he's finally capable of feeling love right now. Felix turns to her, asking why she chose to reject those emotions in the first place. She clarifies that because the demon took over her feelings too, he was the person who most closely resembled her former self, making the choice feel far less risky. Naturally, he questions her with a bit of disbelief, asking if she truly means that. Rather than pulling back, she tenderly holds his hand. Reassuring him, she knows he still retains parts of his true emotions belonging strictly to Felix, not the demon. Touching his tears, she gently asks if he's feeling sad. Felix admits he's forgotten what sadness even means, finding it super annoying that he doesn't understand his own emotional state. She asks if it hurts, but he reveals it's far worse, it terrifies him, describing his internal self as a dark, empty jar with nothing inside. Hearing him lay his heart bare like that causes her expression to soften into pure warmth and cheer. Instead of letting him drown in that fear, she wraps him in a tight embrace. Thanking Felix for being so honest with her, our girl isn't done yet though. She cheerfully presents a glowing pink and purple potion bottle, telling him she has a special surprise for him. Felix inspects the liquid with curiosity, noting it's a complete formula he's never seen before. He asks if she's been learning new formulas lately, and she proudly confirms she has. Seeing his blank look, he asks why she's doing all this in the first place, prompting her to ask if he's going to congratulate her playfully. Taking the cue, Felix gently strokes her hair and neck as she leans back onto the bed, offering his congratulations and praising her hard work before asking what the liquid actually is. That's when she reveals that she named the potion Felix. Surprised, he repeats his name back to her. She explains that its effects are brief and meant for small doses, but drinking it allows him to recall moments and emotions that once brought him joy. Remembering his fear of being an empty jar, she reassures him that whenever he feels that way, he should never hesitate to come to her, promising to do whatever it takes to make him feel complete. An intense passion takes hold as Felix hovers directly over her on the bed, holding her hands in a firm grip. He remarks that she's become remarkably reckless lately, but she simply replies that she's just being honest. Leaning close, he asks if she's wearing perfume, but she softly answers no. He notes how determined she seems to get hurt around him, but our girl counters that she brought a healing potion with her just in case. Felix warns her that even with a potion, it'll still hurt, saying he won't stop even if she starts crying. Instead of pulling away, she smiles happily, declaring that she'd gladly cry tears of joy anyway, and asks if he's going to try the potion. Felix looks down at the bottle and softly tells her that he already knows what he'd remember, even without drinking it. Their gazes lock in complete tenderness as they lean in close and share a deep and loving kiss, becoming intimate. Felix wakes up in bed, looking confused and annoyed as empty potion bottles clatter around him. He quickly realizes these aren't just normal drinks. They're high-grade recovery potions, and a ton of them got drained. Naturally, he turns to Irene sleeping beside him, shaking her like crazy and asking if she's literally dead. Irene just groans, telling him to stop making a scene because she's alive. But when he demands to know how many potions she took, she casually shoots back that counting doesn't even matter since the main goal was just avoiding pain. That immediately sets him off. He snaps that, of course, she didn't feel anything after chugging a whole stash. He tells her to look at herself because she looks like absolute garbage. Our girl gets irritated, reminding him she warned him how dangerous he was, and tells him to stop talking nonsense and get her a doctor. Seeing her actually suffering freaks him out. He panics, asking where it hurts and offering to hold her first. Irene agrees, leaning into him while mentioning the potions didn't reach her bones. That single sentence strikes pure alarm into him. He immediately scoops her into a princess carry, asking in a rush if she broke something and where it hurts. As he carries her down the hallway, Irene tells him not to make a massive fuss. But he yells right back, asking if she thinks he isn't worried about her. Irene reminds him about suffering the consequences of his actions and tells him to hurry up. He actually feels bad, admitting his fault and asking her to just let him worry. Irene tells him he really owes that apology to Felix instead, prompting a genuine apology for being so mean earlier. But as they move down the hall, his mood flips. He smirks, revealing that he used to think Felix would return to normal if Irene died, but now he's got a new plan. If she agrees to help him, he promises to help her escape Felix's body safely. Irene softly thanks him, accepting the deal. He playfully asks if she enjoyed herself, prompting Irene to fire back that she'll happily insult him if he keeps pushing it. Amused by her reaction, he apologizes and asks if she was satisfied with the skills he passed to Felix. Irene quips that she gives his service a 1,000,000-star review, which pleases him as he clarifies it wasn't a standard healing potion. At this point, they make it to the sitting room, where Irene rests on the sofa with a bandaged foot. She starts brainstorming how to explain her injury to Claudia, jokingly suggesting she fell downstairs. Unfortunately for her, he tells her to come up with something realistic. So, she decides to claim it's a sprain, imagining how easily gullible Claudia will fall for it. Turning to him, she notices him staring at his hands and asks what's on his mind. He admits he wants a body of his own. Irene can't help but tease him, suggesting he should just become a cute little puppy instead. He shouts back in absolute disapproval, but our girl keeps rolling with it, describing feeding him, taking him on daily walks, and playing with him every single day. Eventually, they head into the tea room, where a spirit sits calmly over tea and sandwiches. He raises his voice again, insisting he wants to be a real human. Irene suggests a body around 17 to 20 years old. But he argues he's older than Felix and deserves a much bigger, handsomer form, adding sincerely that he doesn't want to lose the ability to see her beauty. That moment comes to a sudden halt when the spirit calmly drops a bombshell. Claudia is going to arrive any minute now. Irene slams the table with a loud bang, screaming for the spirit to delay her until evening so Claudia doesn't catch both of them together. The spirit just sips tea and tells her to stop pointing her finger. But Irene is genuinely terrified. She panics that Claudia will turn the devil into mud and destroy Felix's body in the process, making the guy choke on his tea with a loud cough. Deep down, Irene realizes just how chaotic things will get if Claudia meets the devil first. That thought completely shakes her. But then a light bulb goes off, and she decides her best move is to call someone for backup. Right as the tension peaks, Claudia suddenly shows up at the entrance, collapsing onto the carpet with a thud while complaining about pure fatigue. Overjoyed by the sight of her, Irene rushes forward, hugging her tightly and exclaiming how much she missed her. Claudia hugs her back just as fiercely, confessing she was too lonely to stay away. But right as they're holding each other, Claudia stares deeply into Irene's eyes and randomly asks why this place is even called a mansion. Inside the tea room, the tension is off the charts, and our resident Grand Duke is having a rough time flexing his status. He sits there in exasperation, wondering why this massive place is called just a mansion, before raising his voice to declare that he's a Grand Duke. But unfortunately for him, his title means nothing to Claudia. She's holding Irene tightly, snapping right in his face that no matter who he is, he's ruining her precious time with Irene. He gets defensive fast, asking if he isn't allowed to look at her, but that sets Claudia off even more. She glares at him with a heavy, terrifying aura, demanding to know what he's staring at. The poor guy starts whining to the room, asking what he did to be hated this much and begging for help. Instead, Claudia doubles down and accuses him of secretly stalking Irene. Embarrassed, Irene offers a quick, nervous apology. Lucas keeps complaining that everyone treats him like a villain, insisting he only admires Irene as a teacher. But Claudia shuts that down instantly, warning him that admiration turns into romance real fast, and he could never match Irene. Desperate for an ally, he turns to Erica, but that's a massive mistake. Erica casually sips her tea and hits him with an icy reality check, ordering him not to call her by name, not to look at Irene, and to fix his sitting posture right now. Completely dumbfounded that nobody is taking his side, Lucas tries to pivot, which prompts Irene to ask why he even invited her over in the first place. He stammers out that he just wanted to have lunch, but Irene points out that his invite arrived at dawn. Claudia immediately explodes at the absurdity, asking why he sent a lunch invitation before the sun was even up and blaming him for ruining Irene's mood. The flustered guy asks who would ever invite someone for lunch at dawn, but Erica casually sets down her teacup, noting that plenty of people think about future snacks while actively eating. Feeling completely outclassed, he realizes he has no place here and announces he's leaving, while Irene politely ushers him right out the door. Just as the Grand Duke gets ready to leave, Claudia's sharp eye catches something off. She notices Irene's leg covered in a bandage, immediately causing her anxiety to spike as she asks if our girl is hurt. Irene panics and quickly denies it, but Claudia isn't fooled. She knows Irene normally wears dresses well above her ankles, so seeing her in an unusually long dress raises immediate red flags. Ignoring Irene's frantic pleas about everyone watching, Claudia leans down and pulls up her skirt. That's when the truth comes out. Claudia gasps in shock at the sight of thick white bandages wrapped tightly around Irene's leg. Horrified, she demands to know what happened. Irene tries to cover her tracks by claiming she dislocated her ankle. But Claudia refuses to buy that lie, shouting that a simple dislocation wouldn't look like this. Cornered with nowhere left to hide, Irene finally admits she fell off the terrace. Trying to lighten the mood, Irene weakly jokes that since Claudia calls her an angel, she was testing if she could fly. But Lucas tells her to stop talking nonsense and demands the real truth without any silly jokes. Surrounded by a dark aura, Claudia turns her rage back onto the Grand Duke, accusing him of making Irene do something insanely dangerous. Defensively raising his hands, he explains he only asked Irene to check on the famous war hero, Walter. Claudia fires back that Walter isn't a hero, he's a murderer who sweeps people away like fallen leaves. As the Grand Duke stumbles over his words, Claudia snaps at him for putting Irene in danger without a word, asking if killing countless people magically makes someone a hero instead of a killer. He adds that you can't really judge someone until you meet them in person. Holding Claudia's hand, Irene asks what Claudia would do if Irene herself had killed a lot of people. Claudia firmly answers that those people must have done something wrong. Affectionately reassuring Irene that her only fear is seeing her get hurt, Claudia repeats that Irene is the most precious person to her. Touched yet amused, Irene quietly wishes Claudia would put her handkerchief away before stepping over to the window. She reveals that Felix is back, but he's carrying a devil's curse that only lets him regain consciousness when the sun rises. Right on cue, Felix emerges in the shadows with red eyes and an unbuttoned shirt, bringing a somber mood into the room. Lucas is flipping through some documents, looking pretty annoyed. The papers were supposed to be about Claudia, but turns out they're packed with info on a dead guy. Before he can even process what's happening, Benjamin warns him it's fake and tells him not to read it. But rather than just letting him put it down, the guy uses fire magic to burn the page right out of his hand. Naturally, Lucas completely loses it, grabbing the dude by the collar and screaming at him for almost burning his hand off. Benjamin casually blows on the flame like it's nothing, claiming he only did it to stop him from making a bad choice based on fake intel. That stupid excuse earns him a swift punch to the face, sending playing cards flying off the table. After fixing his collar, Benjamin admits the info is fake, complaining about how vulnerable their circle is getting because of Silentium's foolish moves. Silentium's ruler was hidden behind an agent for years, but recent reports revealed the ruler is actually a woman, and Irene Amber dragged her off, taking over Silentium herself. Lucas calls him out for using expensive intel just to test his fire magic, but the dark-haired guy doesn't even care. He admits he thought Irene had backing from Chamberlain, adding that if he'd known she did it alone, he would have captured and kept her for himself. Lucas tells him to cut the chatter and get straight to the point. That's when Benjamin drops his guard, admitting Irene is the first person who ever made him regret a choice, simply because people lose their reason around her. Lucas promises to forgive the burnt hand if he drops the topic, but he still asks why Benjamin suddenly cares about Irene over Claudia. With a dark smile, Benjamin replies that a useful person is always better than a folding screen. Right on cue, Constantine, lounging on the sofa, coldly asks if all their talking has actually accomplished anything. He further asks if anyone else thinks Walter has been acting weird lately. Benjamin agrees, confessing he felt danger when Walter appeared at the banquet. Lucas wonders if they're just being overly sensitive since the evil energy dropped, but Benjamin analyzes things more deeply. Constantine then points out that Walter used to show faint wizard magic, but now he feels like nothing. He questions if Walter is even a living thing anymore. Rather than dealing with the heavy mood, Benjamin tells Constantine to go do his favorite murder elsewhere and walks off while the Lucas curses him out. Meanwhile, by Lucas's orders, the heroic legend of Walter going back to the battlefield keeps spreading. But here's the crazy part, turns out Olympia actually built a fake Walter doll and sent it off to fight in his place. With that wild situation handled, Felix finally returns disguised as Cinderella, completing a tearful reunion with his family. Just like that, peace seems to return. Inside the quiet library, Felix sits on the sofa wearing glasses, reading a magic book. Irene pops up from behind the couch to ask what he's up to, and he says he's just reading. But when Felix pauses and mentions the paper is too weak, our girl gets a quick idea. Talk about a smooth move. She takes the book and sits directly on his lap, offering to flip the pages for him. Felix doesn't waste a second, taking advantage of it. Leaning near her neck with a hand on her waist, he softly whispers that sitting like this is getting pretty dangerous. Irene blushes and hesitates, but Felix just kisses her cheek and asks her to keep turning pages. Irene shouts that he isn't even actually reading, but Felix instantly recites the text from memory. He reveals that creating a soul-separating potion requires time, a medium, and divine power. Irene asks why she's flipping pages if he already knows it, but Felix gets melancholic as past memories wash over him. He admits he still remembers everything from his past, even if he can't feel or understand those old selfless thoughts anymore. It's hard to find a recipe to separate devil and human souls, but at least divine power keeps them from colliding. Seeing him fall into such a heavy mood, Irene lovingly encourages him, believing he can do it, before asking if he tried the potion she gave him. Stroking her hair, Felix confirms he tried it for Felix. He lifts a strand of her hair to his lips, pulling her into a tight, warm embrace. Felix gently touches Irene's hair, remarking that while it's still a vague thought, she really looks like a cat. Irene asks what he means by that before asking how he actually made that potion last time. She brings up how, after endless failed attempts, adding cherry blossom seeds was what finally made it work. Specifically the seeds, not the roots or leaves. This gets her thinking silently about whether mature cherry blossom seeds represent feelings of longing and waiting. Irene then lets slip that she thought only of him while brewing it, which leaves Felix admitting he just really wants to hold her. They move over to the sofa. But our guy hesitates, worried his absurd strength might break her ribs. Irene reassures him that's not going to happen, and then pulls him into a deep embrace. He admits he often doesn't know what to do at times like this. Touching his hand and cheek with a soft smile, Irene tells him he just needs to say she's pretty. Felix looks at her and softly replies that she's pretty. But right after that sweet moment, in another scene, Irene notices a small gray mouse held upside down by its tail in Felix's hand. Turns out he found it in the lab and planned to throw it away, but Irene asks if he's actually going to let it go. Entering the lab, Felix figures it's better to just kill the limping mouse. In his mind, even with treatment, it'll die soon anyway. So letting it die in peace prevents prolonged torture. Irene respects his opinion, but she asks if he's truly confident he won't regret that decision. That question really gets under his skin. Felix wonders if having feelings again would make him regret killing small creatures, recalling how stuff like that used to bother him. Meanwhile, Irene sets the mouse on a hay bed and uses a bottle of green potion to treat it, insisting that even short-lived creatures like mayflies fight to survive, so he shouldn't decide another creature's existence. Felix muses that once he feels love again, he'll be tormented by the ghosts of those he killed. After finishing the treatment, Irene asks if feeling such guilt is like losing one's soul or being skinned alive. She then explains that an empty life of nothingness differs from a life with real feelings and remorse, and asks which he'd choose. Felix firmly chooses having feelings over total emptiness, even as Irene warns that feelings bring nightmares, crying, and solitary pain. Things Felix reflects he's never experienced by screaming. Irene then tells Felix straight up that if he keeps isolating himself in pain to show a strong front whenever he feels weak, she'll get mad and hug him tightly whenever he runs off. That hits Felix in a surprisingly familiar way. He softly responds that he hopes she gets mad more often, feeling a sense of déjà vu like they've shared this exact moment before. Suddenly, a knock sounds at the door, and Claudia enters, commenting that she gave them private time on purpose before dramatically asking if Felix killed innocent people. Felix remains silent, trapped in dark thoughts about how war makes killing necessary and how feeling guilt insults honor. At the same time, Claudia recalls how her brother used to visit bereaved families to make amends. She tells Felix directly that he can't handle guilt well, so she must sacrifice the 3 bastards and the devil herself. As her fiery aura explodes, Irene anxiously begs her to calm down. Claudia immediately softens up and demands Felix move aside so Irene can focus on her beauty rather than his stupidity. When Felix quietly blocks her and says she knows his heart, Claudia angrily notes he got private time thanks to her. Felix turns away, stating he never asked for help. That's when Claudia threatens that he won't touch a single strand of Irene's hair. But instead of backing off, Felix suddenly pulls Irene into a dramatic dip embrace right in front of her and coolly challenges her to try. Enraged, Claudia attacks Felix in a hilarious scuffle, beating him while complaining about how annoying he became while apart. Felix calmly notes her hits don't hurt, prompting Claudia to cry out for Olivia while Irene begs both of them to stop fighting. Back at the mansion, things immediately dissolve into complete chaos around the coffee table. A blonde guy is sitting there in absolute shock, completely unable to process how Felix, a man who was supposed to be dead, is suddenly back from the grave and dating Irene. But if he was expecting anyone else in the room to celebrate, he's dead wrong. Claudia and Erica shoot the idea down instantly. Exhausted by all the useless arguing, the guy just wants to pack up and go home. So he asks why they oppose the romance if both parties clearly like each other. That only sets off Claudia even more. She makes it crystal clear that if Felix were still her normal brother, maybe she'd let them meet after a full 10 years. But right now, the guy is walking around with glowing red eyes like an out-of-control beast, and Erica even points out he looks ready to devour Irene on the spot. Desperate for someone to talk some common sense, the blonde guy turns to Irene and asks if she really understands nothing about the man standing beside her. Naturally, that hits her like a lightning bolt. Not because she's scared, but because she suddenly remembers she completely forgot to propose to Fel. She's definitely missing the entire point. The blonde guy screams at her to actually read the room, while Claudia decrees that marriage can only happen 30 years after Felix regains his true human form. Meanwhile, Irene isn't even listening because she's already daydreaming about her perfect wedding dress. Tensions hit a boiling point when Felix aggressively grabs the blonde guy's shoulder, crushing his bones until the poor guy screams in total agony. Irene coaxingly intervenes, prompting Fel to let go before she warmly hugs and praises him like a disciplined puppy for behaving so well. The traumatized blonde guy whimpers in total exhaustion, while Erica stands there, finding Felix completely terrifying. Trying to restore order, the blonde guy desperately urges everyone to calm down, reminding them that outsiders can't know about any potential marriage yet. Hearing the word outsider, Irene quietly ponders the term. She thoughtfully suggests revising their overall strategy. Meanwhile, the scene shifts dramatically to the Imperial Palace, where dark political machinations unfold behind closed doors. Benjamin casually lights up a cigarette right in front of the stern emperor, deliberately using the smoke to mock the monarch's reaction and stir up nostalgic fear. But he isn't just trying to be annoying. He lays out his vision for establishing a structured political system after endless warfare, intentionally provoking the monarch by describing how he's grown into an ideal tyrant, impulsive, emotional, and terrifying to his subjects. Naturally, the emperor's eyes flash red as he threatens to blow Benjamin's head off if he keeps making fun of him. Benjamin remains totally unfazed, nonchalantly remarking that a man like him would never be welcomed in hell anyway. Instead of backing down, he methodically lays out the mechanics of a real reign of terror. He points out that by unpredictably wielding power and abruptly extinguishing fear, much like putting out a cigarette, the populace is conditioned into total resignation. Intrigued by the idea of bending everyone to his absolute will, the emperor expresses deep satisfaction. Benjamin encourages him to maintain his despotic rule through unpredictable cruelty, executing people upon both failure and success, while offering practical ideas for public entertainment. He advises sponsoring playwrights, actors, and swordsmanship contests to create grandiose spectacles, while expanding brothels around the ghetto to achieve two birds with one stone. Reaching across the desk, Constantine inquires about an item handed to him. Benjamin reveals is a meal ticket envelope intended for a deeply sinister purpose. Constantine inspects that meal ticket envelope in utter disbelief. A strict condition governs these tickets. They are to be distributed only to those who swear to be faithful believers of Deseo, the realm's god. Turns out, Benjamin is coldly exploiting the desperate, starving populace left behind by the Long War, reminding the conflicted priest that there's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. When Constantine questions whether they are using the covenant of the faithful to manipulate the desperate, Benjamin taunts his moral hesitation, asking if he's still bound by idle doctrines. He instructs Constantine to construct an extraordinarily grand temple, emphasizing that human nature is easily deceived by outward displays of splendor. When asked where funding will originate, Benjamin ruthlessly proposes building the temple by selling pardons, absurd deeds that falsely promise absolution from sin and hell. Horrified by the corrupt scheme, Constantine hesitates, prompting the strategist to lean in maliciously and tell him to stop acting coy and fulfill his duty. He taunts Constantine regarding his tight grip on the high expectations. Driven to suppressed rage, Constantine crumples the meal ticket in his fist. While Benjamin firmly reaffirms his belief in Lord Constantine, unbothered by his internal turmoil, Benjamin dismissively bids him farewell, waving as he casually strides out of the hall and leaves Constantine alone with his grim directives. Enjoying the story so far? Comment part 3 below for part 3. Until next time, ciao.